Chapter 163. The Capital. News suddenly emerged that Zhu Qizhan did not die on the battlefield. It was only a substitute for Hu Bin that had died. This news was like a gust of wind that had grown wings, quickly reaching the homes of the officials. For a moment, many of them were shocked and at a loss of what to do. 5 days after the news appeared, Kuang Yi and Wang Zue, who had followed Ingzong to the battlefield, entered the capital under the protection of 1,000 embroidered uniform guards. Their appearance confirmed the news. Soon after, another piece of news appeared. Ingzong would not return to the capital and would instead accompany Nanjing to proclaim himself as emperor. For a time, the Great Ming would have 2 emperors ruling together. For a good country to have 2 emperors, although they were both surnamed Zhu and shared the same ancestor, it could not be considered a split. However, as time passed, the situation would naturally develop. Many far-sighted officials could see this fact. However, before they could wonder why such a change had occurred, another piece of news appeared that made them dizzy. Ingzong would need many officials to proclaim himself as emperor in Nanjing. If any of the officials in the capital were willing, they could follow Kuang Yi and Wang Zue to Nanjing to take up their posts. Should they pledge loyalty to the current substitute Emperor Zhu Qiyu or the previous Emperor Zhu Qizhan? This was a choice that was placed in front of the officials. For a moment, each of the officials began to make their own calculations and began to consider the gains and losses in this matter. Compared to the officials in the capital who had to make a choice about their future, Yang Qindong in the Yang family manor was very carefree. He spent his days writing and painting in the manor or improving his relationship with his women. He was extremely busy. It was worth mentioning that during these few days of rest, Yang Qindong had taken in Lady Xiang. This woman, who looked like the young 13th mistress, had a strange fragrance and an enchanting figure, which made him fall into a land of gentleness, making him feel very uncomfortable. On the other hand, although Hu Yin had a few intimate actions with Yang Qindong, she had always scrupulously adhered to her bottom line. In her words, the first time had to be reserved for the wedding night in Lulang. Yang Qindong did not insist on this. When it came to matters of the heart, he had always pursued success when the conditions were right. He would never force anyone. Beta Persei, Yang Wu, and Xiao Feng returned to Yang Manor and set up a tight blockade around the perimeter. Yang Qindong, who had always attached great importance to his own safety, would never allow anyone to have the possibility of threatening his safety. Just like that, the days passed in a seemingly pleasant manner, until a guest suddenly came to visit. Yang Qindong had no choice but to welcome him personally. He even went to the entrance of the manor. It was for no other reason than the fact that the person who had come was the imperial guardian of the embroidered uniform guard, Hu Changning, Hu Yan's father. In terms of official position, Hu Changning could be considered Yang Qindong's subordinate, so he did not need to personally welcome him. But from Hu Yan's point of view, Yang Qindong had to personally welcome him to show his sincerity and politeness. Hu Changning only brought Gao Sheng, a lieutenant. When the two of them successfully arrived at the entrance of Yang Manor, they saw Yang Qindong standing at the entrance. Beside him stood Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, 2 servants. Yang Qindong was first conferred the title of Loyal Earl by Ingzong to thank him for saving his life on the battlefield. Then, he was conferred the title of Loyal Marquis by Daizong. At the same time, he also held the position of commander of the embroidered uniform guard. If the former was an empty position, then the latter was real power. He was not even 20 years old, yet he had received such an honor. This was extremely rare, even when the Great Ming Dynasty was founded. Yang Qindong did it. The most important thing was that when Hu Changning arrived, he was still able to stand at the entrance and greet him. Just this alone made Hu Changning's originally cold face a little more gentle. Greetings to Uncle Hu. When Hu Changning rode closer, Yang Qindong cupped his fists and greeted him with the etiquette of a junior. This showed that he did not intend to talk to him in terms of official position, which allowed Hu Changning to avoid a lot of awkwardness. Good. The 6th young master is young and promising, making people envious. I believe that official Yang would be very gratified if he knew in the underworld. Since Yang Qindong did not greet him in terms of official position, Hu Chongning spoke in terms of human relations. When he said these words, there was no doubt that he was an elder. Haha, please. Yang Qindong smiled at Hu Chongning and then made an inviting gesture. Beta Persei took the initiative to lead the horse, and the uncle and nephew walked side by side from the entrance to the Yang clan manor. In the main hall, the guest and the host sat down, and Xiao Yin personally served tea to Hu Chongning. He couldn't help but take a few more glances at this maid who had been serving Yang Qindong since childhood. Sure enough, she was very beautiful. Seeing Xiao Yin, Hu Chongning naturally asked about his daughter. When he found out that Hu Yin had secretly left home and went to the Yang clan manor, her father was naturally furious. But at the time, Dai Zong had just ascended the throne, and because he was afraid that the officials below him would cause trouble, he was confined to home and could not go out. Later on, when the situation was not so tense, the news of Yang Qindong's return spread to the capital. Moreover, he heard that there were several storms outside the Yang clan manor, making it impossible for him to come. Finally, when the Yang clan manor had obtained a temporary peace, he took the initiative to visit. First, he wanted to see his daughter. If possible, it would be better to bring her back. After all, Hu Yan's actions at the time could be called world-shocking. Second, he wanted to ask Yang Qindong about Ying Zong's situation. More importantly, he wanted to know what choice the Hu clan would make in the dual emperor reign. When he saw Xiaoyin, Hu Zhongning opened his mouth and said, "My beloved daughter has accompanied the Yang family's seventh sister to the Yang manor for some time now. Her grandmother and mother miss her very much. Would it be possible for her to return to the Hu estate with me?" Accompanying Yang Duo to the Yang clan manor was just an excuse. After all, a girl's reputation was very important. In the face of Hu Chongning's tactful request to bring Hu Yin back, Yang Qindong naturally had no reason to refuse. "Okay, Xiaoyin, go inform Yin, to return to the Hu estate." Oh, Xiaoyin agreed and turned to leave. However, the bystanders couldn't see that there was a trace of reluctance on her face. Ever since Yang Qindong called the girls together and made a few requests, they became a group of fighting. They really were like sisters. They already had very deep feelings for each other. The news of Hu Chongning's arrival at the Yang clan manor quickly spread to the rear court. Hu Yin was clearly a bit out of her wits. After adapting to life in the Yang clan manor, she didn't want to go back. However, she knew that Yang Qindong had no reason to refuse her father. Xiaoyin saw that Hu Yin was worried and volunteered to serve tea in the front hall. She wanted to inquire about the news. She didn't expect that the young master would so readily agree to Hu Chongning's request. How could she not be disappointed? When Xiaoyin left, and only Yang Qindong, Hu Chongning, and Tiger's Mane were left in the room, Lord Hu showed a hesitant expression. "Uncle Hu, if you have something to say, just say it. There are no outsiders here." When Yang Qindong said there were no outsiders, he naturally meant Tiger's Mane, who was always in charge of protecting him. It's actually nothing much. I'm sure the sixth young master already knows about the dual emperor rule. However, I don't know what your choice will be. Will you go to Nanjing or continue to stay here?" Hu Chongning asked with an awkward expression. No matter what, he was a man of 40 years old. When he encountered something, it was fine if he didn't have any ideas. However, he actually wanted to ask Yang Qindong, who was much younger than him. This made him feel a little embarrassed. However, this was what his father, Hu Ming, wanted. Hu Ming's original words were, "Ask the loyal marquis whether you want to go or stay." This matter was originally caused by him. I'm sure he already has a judgment. Thus, this trip to the Yang clan manor was made. Picking up his daughter was only one of the reasons. His true goal was to find out what Yang Qindong's intentions were. Me? Yang Qindong pointed at himself, then chuckled. "Of course I can't leave. There's the Yang clan manor here, and there's the sky beyond heaven and the immortal abode in the capital. If I leave, I'm afraid that these properties will be seized by others." Yang Qindong expressed that he wouldn't leave, but his reason was that his properties were all here, and it wasn't convenient for him to leave. This answer clearly didn't satisfy Hu Chongning. I'm sure the sixth young master has made quite a bit of money these days. Why would he care about this little bit of silver? That's true, but who in this world would complain about having too much money? Isn't that right, Uncle Hu? Yang Chendong maintained his usual smile. It seemed incomparably sincere, but it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Yes, yes. Hu Changning couldn't see through Yang Chendong's thoughts, so he could only smile. But after smiling, his expression began to fluctuate. It was clear that he was wondering whether or not he should directly ask Yang Chendong what the Hu clan should do in the face of two emperors. Asking too much would only make him seem incompetent. But before he came, his father had repeatedly warned him that he had to ask Yang Chendong's intentions. If it was just for the sake of face, wouldn't he have made this trip in vain? Wouldn't he have failed to live up to his father's expectations? Hu Zhangning, who had something on his mind, looked unhappy and even had some entanglements. All of this was seen by Yang Chendong. He knew that this was his future father-in-law, so he could not give him face. He smiled and took the initiative to ask, Uncle Hu, what do you and Grandpa Hu think about the matter of two emperors? He really didn't want to call Yang Chendong Grandpa, but given their seniority, Yang Chendong had no choice but to do so. But when he did, he still felt a little awkward. Hu Changming hadn't thought about this. He was just worrying about how to ask this question, and now that Yang Chendong had taken the initiative to ask, he was immediately overjoyed. In truth, I would like to hear Honorable Nephew's opinion on this matter. I can't speak of an opinion, but if I must, I would like to give Uncle Hu 4 lines of poetry, Yang Chendong said with a smile. Chapter 164. What are the 4 sentences? Hu Zhangning's interest was piqued. Everyone said that Yang Chendong was a genius. Presumably, the following words would not disappoint him. Sure enough, after Yang Chendong pondered for a moment, he slowly opened his mouth and said, If he is strong, then he is strong. If he is strong, then he is strong. If he is tyrannical, then he is tyrannical. The moon shines over the river. This was the record of the 9 Yang divine art in the heavenly sword and dragon saber. It meant that no matter how strong or fierce the enemy was, one could treat it as a breeze blowing over the mountain. The moon shines over the river. Although it could affect one's body, it could not cause the slightest harm. However, how could one not harm one's body? It meant that in the face of the chaos of the outside world, as long as one stayed strong and worked hard to improve one's abilities in all aspects, one would be unharmed. Hu Ming was originally a capable official and had been the Minister of Rights for many years. It could be said that he had disciples all over the world. His son, Hu Zhangning, had also grown up. With this kind of strength, whether it was following Ying Zong or Dai Zong, there would not be any problems. As long as he stayed within his position, no one could easily touch him. Not to mention, there was also Yang Chendong helping from the side. He would not watch as something happened to the Hu family. In history, even when Ying Zong ascended to the throne, until his death, Hu Ming was still firmly seated in the high position of the Minister of Rights. It was not until he was over 80 years old that he resigned from his position after Ying Zong succeeded in seizing the family. From this, it could be seen that he was originally an evergreen tree in the bureaucracy. How could anyone move him just because they wanted to? Hu Zhangning did not think so much at this time. He was still repeating the 4 sentences that Yang Chendong said. After pondering over it, a smile slowly appeared on his face. Obviously, he had understood Yang Chendong's meaning. He was warning him that the most important thing was to improve his own strength. As for whether he followed Ying Zong or Dai Zong, he could do it with ease. Many thanks. After understanding everything, Hu Zhangning immediately cupped his fist and bowed to Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong naturally could not accept it. He immediately bowed back. Then, the two looked at each other and smiled. After Hu Zhangning got the result he wanted, he left. Hu Yan also left with him. When she left, her eyes were filled with reluctance. Yang Chendong felt very sorry for Hu Yan. Seeing her get into the carriage and about to leave, he suddenly cupped his fist to Hu Zhangning and said, Uncle Hu, in a moment, nephew will send someone to the Hu estate to discuss marriage. Please allow me to marry Yan Er. Hu Zhongning's expression faltered slightly upon hearing this, before a look of elation appeared on his face. Good, good. I'll go back and tell father, mother, and Yinner's mother about this. Thank you for your trouble. Yang Qindong continued to thank him with cupped fists. When he looked towards the carriage, Hu Yan's face was already flushed red. It was impossible to tell if she was happy or excited. Tiger's mane saw everything. He walked up to Yang San and patted him on the shoulder. All right, the more casual young master is with you, the more he doesn't treat you as an outsider. You should be happy. Also, can't you see how busy the young master is? The wedding is near, and the young master has to personally plan and participate in everything. It's a pity that there's not much we can do to help. By the way, when the young master is celebrating, there can be no accidents. If anyone has the intention to cause trouble, there's no need to report it. Just kill them. If there's any responsibility, I'll bear it. Yes, there won't be any mistakes. Don't worry, Chief. When Yang San said this, his eyes narrowed and a cold aura emanated from his body. Without Yang Qindong, he wouldn't be where he was today. If anyone dared to cause trouble on the wedding day, they'd definitely be tired of living. Soon, they'd become a corpse without any warmth. Yang San left quietly, just like how he had come. Even in the Yang manor, very few people had seen him, and even fewer people knew of him. He was also the strongest hidden chess piece in the Yang family system. Usually, he wouldn't appear in front of everyone, but once he appeared, it often meant that something important was going to happen. Yang Qindong didn't ask when Yang San left. At this time, he was teaching the servant, Yang Si, how to use the camera. That's right, the camera. This was something that shouldn't appear in this era, because Yang Qindong's wedding had been taken out. If there was something good, it had to be used. Only in this way could its value be reflected. Although taking out the camera was indeed a bit too shocking, in order to leave this beautiful memory and commemoration, Yang Qindong still did it without hesitation. As soon as this camera that could capture a person's shadow appeared, it immediately attracted a lot of exclamations. If Yang Qindong hadn't been prepared, Yang Si, who had just received it, would have directly thrown it to the ground. People in ancient times were very superstitious. They believed that the shadow was also an important part of the body. They even believed that their 7 souls and 6 spirits could be hidden in it. Now that this thing could clearly capture a person's shadow and even project it, it was no wonder that people were afraid. Xiao Ying was a bit braver. Of course, this didn't mean that she wasn't afraid of anything, but because her relationship with Yang Qindong was closer than others. Naturally, this question was left to her to ask. Young master, what kind of witchcraft is this? It can capture a person's shadow. Will it turn the person who is captured into an idiot? Yang Qindong's mouth was wide open. He was stunned by the question. Yang Qindong's ability to adapt was originally very strong, but he was still defeated by this sudden and unexpected question. Seeing that Xiao Ying didn't seem to be joking and had a very serious expression, he helplessly shook his head and explained, "This is an advanced product brought about by scientific advancement. As for the specific principles, I'm afraid that young master can't explain it clearly to you. But don't worry, this thing can't capture a person's soul, so don't worry." When Yang Qindong said not to worry, Xiao Ying seemed to feel a lot more at ease. At least she dared to walk in front of the camera and even dared to make a few poses that she thought were beautiful. But the others didn't have that much courage. Every time Yang Si raised the camera and pointed it at them, there would always be a burst of chaos and shouting. It felt like a machine gun that could kill people. Wherever it aimed, people would fall to the ground. The camera was just a killing machine. In addition, Yang Qindong also took out a lot of new songs. For example, Hua Feng's Big Bridal Sedan, Intimate Lover, Full Moon Flower, and the ready-made wedding march that he had prepared beforehand. For this, he took out a set of audio equipment from the big warehouse and charged it up in the big warehouse. He was only waiting for the wedding day to use it. In addition, Yang Qindong also prepared a very luxurious carriage. The wheels were made of soft rubber tires taken from the big warehouse. There were even shock absorbers installed on the carriage to ensure its comfort. The outside of the carriage was filled with all kinds of color balloons, making it look very beautiful and beautiful. At the same time, he also made a few sets of beautiful wedding dresses according to his own design. These were all custom-made by the Crimson City's clothing factory. The factory's director, Zhou Hua, personally supervised the completion. It was said that when making these new wedding dresses, her daughter, Wan Xiaoyu, who was the Crimson City's publicity team leader, cried because of it. Wan Xiaoyu had reached the age where she knew about feelings. She had long regarded herself as the sixth young master's woman. It was just that because she was still young, she had no chance to be Yang Shandong's wife. Seeing the man she liked was going to marry someone else, how could she not be sad? For this matter, her father Wan Qi, the director of the power plant, and mother Zhou Hua, the director of the clothing factory, talked to her for a long time. They said that a capable person like the sixth young master was destined to have more than one woman. Xiaoyu grew up quickly. When she grew up, she would naturally have the opportunity to become the sixth young master's woman. Moreover, several sets of wedding dresses were taken out. Except for one set that was sent to Hu Yin in the Hu Mansion, the others were taken away by Qiaoyin, Lady Shui, and Lady Xiang. In their words, they were also attending the wedding day. According to Yang Shandong's intention, they were going to be the bridesmaids of the bride, but in fact, they were also completing their wedding with sixth young master. In this regard, Yang Shandong acquiesced. In the feudal society, even the emperor only had one empress. It was impossible for him to have several wives at the same time, so it was impossible for him to give them a grand wedding. Therefore, it was a good thing to take this opportunity to hold all of them together. The bride had a wedding dress, and Yang Shandong prepared a suit for himself. The pure white suit was tailor-made, making Yang Shandong look more handsome and sunny. As the groomsmen, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and Yang Wu were dressed in black suits, looking very energetic. As for the several servants, Yang San, as the deputy director of the security bureau and the actual helmsman, naturally had to protect everything in the dark. Yang Lu was responsible for the security on the surface. In this way, the manpower was put to good use. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. On the 6th day of October, the Yang family manor was already decorated with festive decorations. Colored balls, ribbons, and bright red, happy characters were posted everywhere. In front of Yang Xi's camera, amid a burst of firecrackers, the wedding procession set off just as dawn broke. Yang Shandong, dressed in a white suit, was sitting in a special carriage. Beside him were Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. Yang Wu was in charge of driving the carriage. Under the protection of Yang Lu, Qiu Vi, and Dao Xiao, they went to the capital. In the dark, Xiao Feng and Lung Feng were on guard at all times to ensure the safety of the young master. The Hu Mansion in the capital was also decorated with ribbons, giving people a feeling of jubilation. Xiao Yin, Madame Shui, Madame Xiang, and the others had arrived at the Hu Mansion a day in advance to accompany Hu Yin through the most difficult night before dawn. When the sky brightened, the women began to get busy and put on the new wedding dresses that had never been seen before. On the side of the road leading to the Hu Mansion, there were already embroidered uniform guards standing guard. Chapter 165. After a portion of the officials left for Nanjing to follow Yingzhong, the remaining officials in the capital were all restored to their original positions. Hu Zhongning was also restored to his position as the guardian of the embroidered uniform guard. In addition, Yang Shandong was still the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, so it was only natural that he would send some embroidered uniform guards to help out. Not only that, but Yang Shandong also ordered that any embroidered uniform guard who came to help out would be rewarded with 100 taels of silver. For a time, the embroidered uniform guard fought amongst themselves for this mission. Those who were able to come here could be considered lucky. When the time came, the carriage from the Yang clan arrived in front of the Hu estate. Yang Shandong, dressed in a white suit, stepped out of the spacious carriage. The wedding ceremony had officially begun. The Immortal Abodes band was already waiting for Yang Shandong to arrive. The music began to play and could be faintly heard from several streets away. Hu Yin, who was dressed like a fairy in a white wedding dress, walked up to Yang Shandong, accompanied by Qiao Yin, Madame Snow, and the bride, who were also wearing a wedding dress and looked very beautiful. Hu Yan's blushing face perfectly explained what it meant to put the moon and flowers to shame. What was different from the other women was that there were two children who were only 5 or 6 years old standing behind Hu Yan, a boy and a girl who looked like a golden couple. They each pulled up a corner of the white wedding dress so that the long, fluttering wedding dress would not fall to the ground, but also showed her magnanimity. There was no red veil. This was Yang Qindong's idea. After reporting this to the Hu clan, Yang Qindong received their support. Thus, Yang Qindong took the bride, Hu Yan, who could walk on her own, to the Hu clan's main hall. Here, they knelt down and kowtowed to Hu Zhongning and his wife. The completion of this step was completely recorded by the camera. From the footage, it could be seen that Hu Zhongning and Madame Shui's faces were extremely pale. It was clear that they were also frightened by the equipment that could record their figures. After paying his respects to the elders, Yang Qindong carried Hu Yan out of the Hu estate. Along the way, the courtyard was filled with all kinds of gifts that Yang Qindong had given to the Hu clan. There was no need to introduce the types of items. In short, someone had calculated the total value of these items after the event. The total value of these items was over 1 million taels of silver. Just this amount alone was enough to shock countless people. This was one of the most beautiful stories in the capital, because not even the emperor would be willing to part with so many good things. From this matter, it could also be seen that Yang Qindong valued Hu Yan. The inside and outside of the immortal abode were already packed with people. In order to congratulate the patriarch on his wedding today, all the diners will have a 50% discount. Even the commoners who didn't come to the immortal abode to spend money could still enjoy the delicacies they had prepared. The premise was that the whole family had to come together. At the very least, the couple had to bring a child and bring their own lunchboxes. At that time, all the children who came would receive a delicious little pastry. The news had been released 3 days ago. By morning, the entire street in front of the immortal abode was packed with people. As a result, the embroidered uniform guards who were responsible for the security of the area were given a lot more work to do. Fortunately, the people who came to receive the delicacies and pastries were all very well behaved. Some entered and some left, so there wasn't much panic. After leaving the Hu estate, the bridegroom, Yang Qindong, personally drove the carriage. Hu Yan, Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang were seated inside. Yang Qindong, who was driving the carriage, sang the bridal sedan in fear. Tiger's mane and the others, who had long since learned how to sing, sang along loudly. When the sun comes out, I climb the mountain. When I reach the peak, I want to sing. My song floats to my little sister. When she hears my song, she smiles. Yang Qindong's cheerful voice rang out. Sitting in the spacious and comfortable carriage, Hu Yan and the other girls were filled with happiness. As they looked at the brightly colored balloons around the carriage, their faces were brimming with happiness. The carriage passed through the streets of the immortal abode. Along the way, one new song after another could be heard. All of them were joyous songs that suited the occasion, and the people who had come along to watch the show all cheered with joy. As they passed through the streets of the immortal abode and saw the crowded streets, Hu Yan and the other girls smiled at each other. This was the young master doing a good deed, as well as accumulating good karma. Although he had to spend some money to do so, in the eyes of the girls, the significance of this action was far more profound. The carriage finally left the capital, and under the protection of the embroidered uniform guards, it headed for the Yang clan manor. At this time, there were all sorts of carriages and bridal sedan chairs waiting outside the Yang clan manor. Many officials of the court were waiting here for the bridegroom to arrive. He had only been in the capital for a little more than a year, less than 2 years. However, Yang Qindong had used his own efforts to prove his strength. With money and power, who wouldn't give him this little bit of face? And this wasn't even mentioning the fact that he was marrying the granddaughter of the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao. Under the witness of many honored guests, Yang Qindong took Hu Yan's arm and led her to the main hall of the Yang clan manor, where the two principals were already seated. Yang Qindong and his wife were no longer present, So the ones presiding over Yang Chendong's wedding were his big brother Yang Gong and big sister Yang Fei. The entire Yang clan had come to Yang Chendong's wedding, and even his second brother Yang Rang was in the crowd. However, it was clear that his complexion was rather unsightly. He had originally believed that with his sixth brother dead, he, as the second brother, would be able to openly take over the family property. He hadn't expected that Yang Chendong would return, and in such a domineering manner, and even be conferred the title of Valiant Marquis. The affairs of the world were truly unpredictable, and Yang Rang had lost a great deal of face. For Yang Chendong's wedding, he had invited all the members of the Yang clan, including all the important ministers in the capital, but his second brother didn't send anything. This had already proved Yang Chendong's attitude. Even so, Yang Rang still came by himself. He knew that this might be an opportunity to change the relationship between himself and his sixth brother. In the main hall, Yang Gong was on the left and Yang Chendong was on the right, accepting the kneeling ceremony of Hu Yin Xing, his new daughter-in-law. Under the insistence of Yang Chendong, they only completed the first bow to heaven and earth and the second bow to the parents. As for the third step of entering the bridal chamber, it was canceled. According to Yang Chendong, women didn't just stay at home to take care of their husbands and children. They could also do many other things that they liked to do. This was also called the liberation of women. Since it was liberation, then he would start with his wife. After communicating with Hu Yin in advance, and knowing that she didn't want to enter the bridal chamber so early and wait for a long time, he agreed to her request and allowed her to change into a beautiful qipao. Then, she reappeared in front of everyone and toasted the guests with him. When the ceremony reached this point, it was time for the wedding banquet to begin. For the important ministers, the banquet was also a part of their work. There were many things that were difficult to say and difficult to do, but they were often easily done with the passing of a cup. Yang Chendong's wedding gave everyone an opportunity to interact. For a moment, the ministers came and went, and it was very lively. However, this liveliness reached a climax when the bride, Hu Yin, and the three other women changed into decent qipaos and appeared. Yang Chendong announced in front of everyone that today was not only the day he married Hu Yin, but also the day he took Xiao Yin, Lady Shui, and Lady Xiang as his concubines. After listening to Yang Chendong's announcement, the three women, who were completely unaware before, were so excited that their faces turned red. They originally thought that they were very happy to be able to follow Dong Shui. With their status, they didn't dare to ask for anything. However, they didn't expect that happiness would come to them so quickly and so suddenly. In response, Hu Yin looked at them with a smile. She wasn't surprised at all. Obviously, she already knew about this news and must have agreed. Otherwise, Yang Chendong wouldn't do such a thing in public. He was marrying his wife and concubines on the same day. Although this kind of thing had happened before, most of the protagonists who did it were extremely desolate. However, no matter how one looked at it, Yang Chendong wasn't someone who was muddle-headed. At this point, the general public thought that it was normal for emperors to have many wives and concubines. They also thought that it was natural and believed that China's ancient people practiced polygamy. However, this wasn't the case. Many modern people learn about ancient China through media, such as movies, or web novels. At the same time, they often define the social environment and culture of that era through the interpretation of the drama. Therefore, when the dramas performed were like the hotly discussed palace dramas such as Zhan Huan Zhuan, Rui Zhuan, Yinchi Strategy, and Do You Know It?, the general public would easily take the situation of the emperor and his ministers having many wives and concubines as a matter of course and believe that the ancient Chinese people practiced polygamy. In fact, what we don't know is that China's marriage model since ancient times was mainly monogamy, and not the stereotypical polygamy and monogamy. The Great Ming Society's Archives number 163 clearly recorded the punishment for those who violated the law. For ordinary people, if they have a wife but still marry her, they will be flogged 90 times and divorced. If they are over 40 years old and have no children, they will be allowed to marry concubines. Violators will be flogged 40 times. However, the rules weren't absolute. Very few people would take concubines. However, those who took concubines were mainly those with high social status. In other words, the higher the status, the more concubines they would take. Therefore, the imperial family naturally had the most concubines, followed by the important officials and the rich. Commoners rarely had the opportunity to take concubines. Therefore, taking concubines was considered a privilege in China's traditional culture. In the Great Ming Society's archives, number 57, it clearly stated that taking concubines, as well as the number of concubines, had to be investigated by the Ministry of Rights. The heir and the prince had 4 concubines. The eldest son and the general had 3 concubines. It was true that Yang Qindong was the marquis of loyalty and courage, so taking in 3 concubines wasn't that much of a violation of the rules. However, why didn't he mention it in advance? Since no one knew about it, didn't that mean that this matter wasn't reported to the Ministry of Rights? Chapter 166. With that in mind, the officials all turned to look at the officials from the Ministry of Rights who had come to attend the banquet. Hu Xiao was the Minister of Rights, and had been for many years at that. At least a third of the officials in the ministry had been promoted by him or had close ties to him. This time, his granddaughter was getting married. Many officials from the Ministry of Rights had come to show their support. When these officials noticed the gazes of their peers, they all lowered their heads. This proved that Yang Qindong hadn't informed the Ministry of Rights about taking concubines. As if he'd known that everyone would react this way, Yang Qindong smiled at them and said, "I didn't inform the Ministry of Rights beforehand, but I did inform the Minister of Rights. I'll make it up to you later. I only did this because I wanted to give the 3 of them a pleasant surprise." As he spoke, Yang Qindong's gentle gaze fell on Xiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang. His gaze was filled with love. Yang Qindong's actions had indeed given the 3 women a pleasant surprise. As for their reactions, they'd all been recorded by Yang Si. When the officials heard that Yang Qindong had told the Minister of Rights that they'd be reported to the Minister of Rights after the banquet, they all came to a sudden realization. Since that was the case, what did they have to worry about? Besides, what did it have to do with them? In reality, Yang Qindong hadn't told Hu Xiao about this. What kind of joke was this? He was marrying someone else's granddaughter, and he was also marrying 3 concubines at the same time. It would be strange if Hu Xiao agreed. However, he dared to say this because he was sure that Hu Xiao wouldn't expose him. Otherwise, if he got into trouble, Hu Yin would also suffer. When the results were announced, it first drew a lot of discussion, but Yang Qindong easily resolved it. After that, he led the 4 women in a toast to the guests. Speaking of which, Hu Yin and the others weren't women who only knew how to stay at home. They'd all seen the world, and with Yang Qindong's guidance, they didn't show any signs of fear. Instead, they generously raised their cups and toasted. The atmosphere was quite harmonious. At the same time, the Immortal Abodes band and actors began to sing and dance outside the Yang clan's courtyard. It was a lively scene. Among the guests, Hanji also received Yang Qindong's wedding invitation. Out of camaraderie, he was pulled over by Shangguan LV Gui. At this time, when he saw Yang Qindong with the 4 women, his teeth itched with hatred. "Commander, this Yang Qindong is getting bolder and bolder. He didn't even report taking concubines. He dared act first and report later. This clearly shows that he doesn't put the laws of the great Ming dynasty in his eyes. We cannot allow this to continue." How could Lu Gui not know that Yang Qindong's actions today were a bit out of line? However, he knew that Hanji's main motive was revenge. It was because his brother-in-law, Wang Go, had been killed by Yang Qindong. That was why he said those words with hatred. But no matter what kind of mentality he had, Hanji was still one of them. If a superior wanted his subordinates to listen to his orders, he had to empathize with his subordinates. Thus, he nodded and said, "All right, we'll discuss it when we get back. We'll teach him a lesson. Thank you, Commander, for your help." When Hanji heard that LV Gui was finally ready to make a move, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. He quickly raised his arms and used Yang Chendong's wedding wine to toast LV Gue. The funny thing was that he was also scheming against Yang Chendong. All banquets must come to an end. Although the programs were endless, the guests still left one by one when the sky was almost dark. Among them, there was someone who didn't want to leave. That was the second brother, Yang Rang. At noon, Yang Chendong toasted each table. He had more or less spoken to the guests, but he acted as if he didn't see his second brother. Not only that, even his sisters-in-law treated him like air. The facts had already shown that Yang Chendong was very angry with him. Since he had come today, he naturally wanted to use this opportunity to perform well and strive to turn hostility into friendship. Second brother, let's go. Today is not suitable for doing other things. The eldest brother, Yang Gong, walked in front of Yang Rang with a face full of alcohol. The behavior of his second brother a while ago, even he was extremely unhappy after seeing it. But after all, they were still brothers. He couldn't just watch Yang Rang be unlucky. Big brother, seeing Yang Gong walk over, Yang Rang showed an amiable and even fawning smile. Big brother, you must tell little six that I did it for the good of the Yang family manor. In that case, even if I didn't do it, others would do it. At least if I did, I would have given the Yang family a way out, right? Listening to Yang Rang's sophistry, Yang Gong was very disgusted. He could say so many reasons for doing bad things. He was really shameless to the extreme. Okay, let's talk about it later. Let's go first. Yang Gong didn't agree. He just wanted to take his second brother away, so that he wouldn't stay and cause trouble and attract the displeasure of his sixth brother. If that happened, it would really spoil the beautiful atmosphere. His eldest brother did not agree to plead for mercy and just wanted to drag him away. How could Yang Rang be willing to comply? His face immediately changed. All right, since eldest brother doesn't care about our brotherhood and is unwilling to help second brother to plead for mercy, then you can leave by yourself. In short, I will wait here. If little six doesn't come out, I won't go anywhere today. I want to see if he really doesn't recognize me as his elder brother. If this matter spreads out, who will look good at that time? Yang Rang shamelessly shook off Yang Gong's arm and then looked at the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor. He looked like he wouldn't leave until he saw the main person. He didn't expect his brother to be such a person. Shamelessness is invincible. At this moment, Yang Gong didn't know what to do. At this moment, a group of people walked out from the inner courtyard. The person in the lead was a woman. It was the eldest sister of the Yang family, Yang Fei. Although they were all from the Yang family, the treatment was obviously different. When Yang Fei walked out, there were 4 brides beside her. Every one of them accompanied her and talked. From time to time, one could see the eldest sister of the Yang family smiling. When he saw his eldest sister walking out, Yang Rang quickly turned around to avoid her. He wasn't afraid of his eldest brother Yang Gong because his eldest brother's ability was mediocre and not worthy of his attention. However, his eldest sister was different. Most of them grew up following behind Yang Fei. When they were young, they were rarely taught a lesson by their eldest sister. As a result, when they grew up, there was still a fear in their hearts. Yang Rang wanted to avoid her, but now that most of the guests had left, there was only a limited number of people left. Yang Fei only needed to sweep her eyes and naturally saw him. When she saw that it was her disappointing second brother who was pacing back and forth, she immediately figured out what was going on. Her face immediately darkened. As the eldest sister, Yang Fei naturally hoped to see the Yang brothers and sisters united. Even if someone did something wrong, if she could give them a chance to forgive, she would be willing to give them the chance. However, as Yang Chendong's second brother, Yang Rang had done something wrong first, and then he wanted to seek justice on the day of the wedding. This was really a bit aggressive. She took large strides and arrived behind Yang Rang, who had just turned around. Yang Gong, who was standing at the side, saw Yang Fei first and quickly called out with a smile, "Eldest sister." When he heard his eldest brother's call, Yang Rang knew that he couldn't avoid it. He could only unwillingly turn around and force out a smile. "Hello, eldest sister. Oh, you still recognize me as your eldest sister? Since that's the case, then leave immediately." Today is my little brother's wedding day. Do you have to stay here and cause trouble? Yang Fei said with a cold face and a rude tone. Eldest sister, that's not what I meant. I just want to talk to little Six and explain what happened before. How could Yang Rang admit it? He spoke with a face full of excuses. Hearing Yang Rang call Yang Qindong little Six, as if he was the boss, Yang Fei was even angrier. She thought about how her little brother had done so many things for the Yang family, and even saved Ingzong on a battlefield. That was how dangerous it was to be conferred the title of Marquis. However, there was someone in the family who was dragging her family down. This was truly a chilling action. If she was in Yang Fei's shoes, she would also feel very uncomfortable. With this anger, Yang Fei couldn't be bothered to be polite anymore. She turned to look at Beta Persei and the rest, and said, "Go, chase Yang Rang out of the manor. If he doesn't leave, you can beat him until he leaves. I will bear all the consequences. I believe that even if father and mother are watching from the heavens, they won't blame me." Yes, Beta Persei had long found Yang Rang an eyesore. This person was lucky to have been born into the Yang family. If it had been anyone else, who knew how many times they would have died by now. After agreeing, Beta Persei strode forward and lifted Beta Persei off the ground with a thick arm. He didn't seem to use any effort to lift him off the ground. The pitiful Beta Persei was dragged out of the manor like a rabbit, then thrown to the ground. If Little Six had ordered someone to do this, he would naturally yell and scream, saying that the other party didn't respect his elder brother. However, since his eldest sister had ordered it, there was nothing he could do. He was the one who had been rude first. Now that he had been thrown out, he was reaping what he sowed. Even though he was still unwilling, Yang Rang had no choice but to stand up with the help of the servants outside the manor. He then entered the palanquin and left the place. In the study of a Yang manor, Yang Qindong was listening to Tiger's Main's report. The report included the situation in the immortal abode, as well as the various performances of the officials who had attended the banquet today. The people from the security bureau had disguised themselves as attendants and wandered around the banquet, listening in on everyone's conversations. This was the true record of an official's appearance. At the very least, through this, Yang Qindong could see who had opinions of him and who were dissatisfied with him. Young Master, the embroidered uniform guard, just sent someone to deliver this. They said that in order to stabilize the situation in the capital, Young Master is invited to the embroidered uniform guard's office tomorrow morning to discuss political matters. After Tiger's Mane reported the situation at the banquet, he told Yang Qindong the news he had just received. Chapter 167. Mao, Rabbit. Time was from 5 to 7 o'clock, with 6 o'clock as the time. Letting Yang Qindong go to the meeting so early was obviously not to let the bridegroom have a good night's sleep. It was too obvious that he was deliberately making things difficult for Yang Qindong. In this regard, Yang Qindong just responded with a cold snort, and then ignored it as if he hadn't heard the news. After dealing with the business, Hu Meng tactfully excused himself. Today was the young master's big day, so he had to be tactful to stay far away from the scene. With no one bothering him anymore, Yang Qindong straightened his clothes and walked towards Hu Yan's courtyard in the inner courtyard. Tonight, he was going to perform the Duke of Zhou's rites with her. When he thought of this, his footsteps seemed to quicken. In the bridal chamber, Hu Yan, who had just sent away her elder sister Yang Fei, had returned. After removing her makeup, she changed into a red bridal dress and sat by the bed, waiting. At this time, the room was very quiet, and only the sound of Hu Yan's little heart beating could be heard. Although she had long thought that there would be a day like this, and even looked forward to it, but when she really arrived, she still felt a little nervous. In particular, the servant girl Xiaoqing was nowhere to be found, and no one accompanied her to talk, so the tense atmosphere was even more intense. Creak! The door was pushed open from the outside. Out of instinct, Hu Yan blurted out, "Is it Xiaoqing?" "What? You don't like Lulang, but Xiaoqing?" With a man's magnetic voice, Yang Qindong, who had changed into a loose red robe, stepped in. Seeing that it was Yang Qindong, Hu Yan's heart beat faster. No, What do you mean by no? Do you like Luling more or Xiaoqing more? Yang Qindong knew that she was nervous, but he still teased her, which was also a way to relieve her tension. I like Luling more. At this time, Hu Yan's voice was very low. If it weren't for Yang Qindong's good hearing, he probably wouldn't have heard what she was saying. After saying this, she had lowered her head. He didn't need to look to know how red her face was right now. Haha. After seeing the answer he was satisfied with, Yang Qindong strode forward, picked up Hu Yan, and put her on the bed. At the same time, he waved his sleeve, and all the red candles in the room were extinguished. I like enrich. After a short sentence, a series of rustling sounds could be heard, and then the moon, which was originally hanging in the sky, was now nowhere to be seen. Soon the entire courtyard was filled with extravagant sounds, 10,000 words omitted. Happy time always passed quickly, and the sky slowly brightened. At the embroidered uniform guard's office, seeing that the time had passed and Yang Qindong still hadn't arrived, Hanji acted as if he had won the lottery. He quickly went to LV Gue, who was sitting there with his eyes closed. Commander, he didn't come. It seems like he doesn't take your words seriously at all. LV Gue didn't even open his eyes after hearing this. No one knew what he was thinking. His eyeballs kept rolling. According to Hanji's understanding of LV Gue, he was really angry at this time. It seemed that Yang Qindong wouldn't have a good time. That was the truth. LV Gue still didn't open his eyes, but the words he said made Hanji feel very relieved. Yang Qindong didn't listen to your orders. Suspend his duties first and spread this decision to all the embroidered uniform guards. Suspension for not attending the meeting. This was LV Gue's trap for Yang Qindong. Or it could be said that he had already planned this, so when he said this, he didn't hesitate at all. Yes, Hanji was waiting for this sentence. After he agreed, he turned around and left. He was eager to spread the news and let all the embroidered uniform guards know. In the future, he would like to see how arrogant Marquis would be in the future. The embroidered uniform guards and the East Faction guards had always been the focus of the Security Bureau. If there was a situation here, it would be sent to the Yang family village and sent to the Director Tiger's man. As for when to show it to the young master, it was up to the director to decide whether the situation was serious or not. After tossing and turning for half the night, Hu Yin fell asleep tired. She vaguely felt that someone was moving beside her. In her mind, she suddenly thought that she was no longer the young lady of the Hu family, but the daughter-in-law of the Yang family. She immediately struggled to get up. Well, baby, sleep a little more. A woman must have enough sleep. Also, there are not so many rules here. Yang Qindong's voice came to her ear. Then she felt a heat on her forehead, and their lips came in close contact. After kissing Hu Yan's forehead, Yang Qindong walked out of the bedroom with a face full of energy. After going out, he saw that Xiaoqing had already prepared the water and was waiting to serve Hu Yan. He smiled and said, "Don't disturb Yin, first, let her sleep a little longer. Also, inform the cook, Ichioer, to immediately make a fresh, nutritious breakfast and send it over when a young lady wakes up." Hearing that Yang Qindong was so concerned about her young lady, Xiaoqing's face was full of joy, and she quickly agreed. Yang Qindong strode out of the inner courtyard. From afar, he saw Hu Meng waiting for him with a serious expression on his face. Seeing that Hu Meng's brows were almost knitted together, Yang Qindong approached him and asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen?" "Young master, there's a small matter. The embroidered uniform guards just sent a message saying that you didn't come to the meeting. Lu Gue and the others suspended your position in the embroidered uniform guards." Tiger's man's voice became heavier as he spoke. Obviously, he had a lot of opinions about this matter. Someone dared to make trouble for the young master. With his character, it was best to kill and teach them a good lesson. Suspended? That's fine. Since it's like this young master can have a good rest as a newlywed. Yang Qindong didn't care after hearing this. It was just a position in the embroidered uniform guards. He really didn't care about it. Moreover, something big was about to happen. Lu Gui's actions were just smashing his own foot with a rock. "Let's go for a jog." Not taking this information seriously, Yang Qindong smiled at Tiger's man and started his morning jog. Tiger's man was happy that the young master's mood wasn't affected by this. He was worried that the young master would be angered, but now it seemed that he worried too much. The young master's mind was as broad as the sea. The news that the valiant Marquis, Yang Chundong's position in the embroidered uniform guards was suspended spread like a gust of wind to the ears of all the officials in the capital. Some of the older officials who believed that they had seen and experienced many things couldn't help but sigh. As expected, an official couldn't be too high profile. Just look at the commotion yesterday. Everyone in the capital knew about it. Wasn't he about to suffer retribution soon? Using this matter, who knew how many people called the younger generation of their families to teach them to endure silently, learn the way of the mean, and not stand out too much? As the main character of this matter, Yang Chendong wasn't as depressed as everyone thought. On the contrary, he was leading the 4 girls, plus 7th sister Yang duo, out of the Yang family manor, heading straight for a place not far away that the common people called Chicken Crow Mountain. Yang Chendong wanted to bring the 5 beauties to the barbecue. For this reason, he had each shower prepare a lot of ingredients. Tiger's man, Beta Persei, Chio V's first guard, and 3 squads of Cold Front members accompanied them. Everyone left the manor. It was currently autumn. The maple leaves on the mountain were golden yellow, and the scenery along the way was indescribably beautiful. The 4 girls couldn't stop shouting. Women in ancient times rarely had the opportunity to go out like this. Even if they went out, they were often very strict and weren't allowed to casually look around. How was it like being with Yang Chendong, where they could do whatever they wanted? In the spacious and comfortable carriage, lying down wasn't a problem at all. Every time they saw beautiful scenery, they would take out their only camera to record the beauty. Because of this, the caravan also stopped and traveled. In the afternoon, they finally arrived at the foot of Chicken Crow Mountain, which was 30 li away. Soon, everyone set up the grill, held the charcoal, started the fire, prepared the ingredients, and fetched water. The guards also looked around with vigilant eyes. There wasn't the slightest bit of panic, which surprised the 4 girls and made them very happy. The environment in the wilderness was the easiest for people to let their thoughts run wild. Because of this, their mood was also very good. Later on, they even followed a few maids and maids to make skewers out of curiosity. It wasn't enough to just do it themselves, so they even pulled Yang Chendong over. Thus, the dignified marquis of the great Ming dynasty actually started working there with the servants. This isn't good. 7th sister Yang duo really couldn't believe the scene in front of her. Her husband, Wang Go, used to be just an insignificant official, but he had always stayed away from the kitchen. The idea of a gentleman staying away from the kitchen was deeply rooted in people's hearts at that time. But look at Yang Chendong. Even though he had the title of marquis and owned such a large family property, he still worked with everyone. From this point alone, the biggest difference between him and the others was that Yang Chendong was different from others. There's nothing bad about it. Since we came out to play and eat, of course, the atmosphere will be better if everyone works together. Hu Yin and Yang duo had the best relationship, and the distance between them was also the closest. Naturally, they heard the whispering just now. But Yang duo still wanted to say something. No buts. Lulang didn't refuse. I think he is willing to do such a thing. As a sister, you don't have to care so much. You should hurry up and work. Don't be outdone by others. Hu Yin chuckled. After completing the experience of turning from a girl to a woman last night, her mind didn't seem to be as mature as before. At this time, she was completely like a child. If it wasn't for the torment last night, and her body didn't allow it, she would probably start jumping around in a while. Chapter 168. Yang duo's doubts were quickly led astray by Hu Yin. In just a short while, not only did she not let her 6th brother Yang Chendong rest, she even took out a portion of the tasks in front of her and placed them in front of him. In her words, it was called capable people do more work. When Yang Chendong was a soldier in his previous life, he did everything very quickly. Naturally, the speed at which he worked was not something these young ladies could compare to. with Yang Duo taking the lead. Hu Yin quickly placed her own skewers in front of Yang Chendong. Not only that, she also brought Xiao Yin, Lady Shui, and Lady Xiang's skewers over. Xiao Yin and the other two naturally did not dare to mess around like Hu Yin. They could only look at Yang Chendong with an awkward and slightly nervous expression. You guys are too much of a bully. Looking at the mountain of skewers in front of him, Yang Chendong showed a helpless expression, causing the women to laugh out loud. Even Tiger's Mane's wife, Feng and Yang Xi's wife, Mu Lily, could not help but cover their mouths and chuckle. At that moment, the two women were greeted by their husbands' stern gaze. What the young master did with his wives was considered a pleasure in the boudoir. Outsiders were absolutely not allowed to comment on anything. Tiger's Mane and Yang Xi had been with Yang Chendong for a long time, so they naturally understood this principle. After being glared at, the two women curled their lips and looked as if they were not afraid. However, they turned around and busied themselves with their work. Obviously, they were not afraid of their husband, but they knew that they had to give face at the right time. This way, they could live a happy life. Looking at Yang Chendong, in the face of the work that was completely beyond one person's ability, he waved his hand and called Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and Yang Xi over. Put on. I'll leave this work to the three of you. Young master, this. Tiger's Mane and the other two looked troubled. If they were asked to charge and break through enemy lines, they would definitely not object. However, when it came to this kind of work, the three of them were really a little embarrassed and unhappy. What is this? The young master asked you to do something, and you're still making excuses? Let me tell you, this job is going to be done by the three of you. You have to finish it. Also, spread the news to Crimson City. Let them train a female army. The number doesn't need to be too big. Just about 200 people will be enough. In the future, it's better to let them protect Madam. Also, it's better to let them do the delicate work. Yang Chendong sighed. He didn't want a group of men to protect his women. It would be inconvenient. It was better to prepare and train some female soldiers in advance. That's a good idea. A good idea. I've long heard from Xiao Feng that there are many girls in Crimson City who want to become soldiers, but other than entering the propaganda team, there doesn't seem to be a better opportunity. Now that we have a female army, the problem will be solved. Beta Persei laughed foolishly. Oh, what problem has been solved? Is it your marriage? Tiger's Mane laughed after hearing this. Among the few of them, Tiger's Mane and Yang Xi's personal problems have been solved. Only Beta Persei had not made any progress in this regard. It was no wonder that Tiger's Mane said this. No. The burly Beta Persei blushed when Tiger's Mane said this. He wanted to argue about something. However, when Yang Chendong saw this, he smiled and said, Tiger's Mane is right. Beta Persei, you're already 20 years old. It's time for you to find a wife. Work is important, marriage is also important, and carrying on the family line is even more important. Since Yang Chendong said this, Beta Persei could not refute. He could only lower his head and agree. However, anyone could see that he was really uncomfortable holding it in. He wanted to find a chance to learn from Tiger's Mane. They skewered the meat and started to roast it. The sky gradually darkened. Fortunately, Lung Feng had already prepared dry wood. He set them together and lit them up. As a result, a huge bonfire was formed. When the bonfire was lit, the flames burned fiercely. A sense of warmth instantly spread throughout everyone's body. Bonfire, the fragrance of meat, good wine, beautiful women. When all of this was put together, it formed a very beautiful picture. Very soon, other than Lung Feng, who was on sentry duty and in charge of safety, everyone else, including Yang Chendong and his 4 wives, left the scene and gathered around the bonfire to dance and sing. Everyone's cheeks were red, and all of them were beaming with joy. Hu Yan's left hand was held by Yang Chendong, and on her right was Yang Duo. Her hands were raised from time to time, and her legs were kicking and jumping. Her face was like a peach blossom, and she was extremely happy. This kind of life was something she had never dared to imagine before. It was so unrestrained, free, and even freewheeling. And it seemed that her future life could be accompanied by this? How could it not make people yearn for it and feel relaxed and happy? They did not know how long they had been dancing and singing. They drank a lot of wine, and under Dong Shuai's intentional or unintentional actions, Hu Yin was a little drunk. It was already very late. When everyone was tired, Hu Yin felt her body being lifted into the air. She was carried onto Yang Qindong's back, and they entered a spacious and sturdy tent that had already been set up. Hu Yin knew that beautiful things like last night would happen again. Just when she was feeling shy, Yang Qindong had gone out and walked in again. This time, he was holding Xiao in his arms. The sudden appearance of another woman made Hu Yin feel a burst of shyness and surprise. The joy of a boudoir was certainly something that people yearned for, but why did he bring another person out? Before Hu Yin could figure it out, Lady Shui and Lady Xiang were also carried into the tent by Yang Qindong. The other three women had already seen this kind of thing. They slept together, so of course, they knew what Dong Shuai was going to do. They were a little shy and a little excited. Hu Yin, on the other hand, was completely unaware. Just when she was wondering why there were so many people all of a sudden, a big hand began to wander around her body. That feeling made her feel comfortable and shy. She forced herself to stay awake and said, "Lu Lang, don't do this. There are others, not others. They're all your sisters. Haha, let's do it together." Yang Qindong said very soberly. Under his skillful methods, Hu Yin was quickly turned into a pile of mud. Then, she was completely at his mercy. In her consciousness, she seemed to see a few white bodies. Then, she fainted happily. For a moment, the garden was filled with intoxicating spring. A ray of sunlight slowly shone through the tent and shone on Hu Yan's face. She felt the warmth and slowly opened her eyes. What came into view was that Xiao Yin and the other women were still sleeping. She could not help but exclaim. Her mind instantly recalled some of the things that happened last night. Since she was young, she had never been taught such words and thoughts in her education. For a moment, she could not believe that something like this would happen to her. Xiao Yin, Lady Shui, and Lady Xiang had already woken up. After all, it was not the first time they had done this. Their physical recovery was naturally much better than Hu Yan's. It was only because they did not know how to face it that they pretended to be asleep. However, after this scream, they could no longer pretend. They opened their eyes one by one and saw Hu Yan's tears flowing down the corners of her eyes. Hu Yan's crying made the other three women panic. They quickly came forward to comfort her and took the blame, saying that it was all their fault. "No, you're not wrong. It's all his fault. I can't accept this." Hu Yin didn't want to be estranged from her sisters as soon as she came here. Although she was the official wife, she had never thought about how to rely on such an identity to bully others. "Please don't blame Sir. I'm sure Big Sister doesn't know that Sir is especially good in that aspect. None of US can satisfy him." Xiao Yin hated it when people talked bad about Yang Qindong. Even if the person who spoke was Hu Yin, she was still unhappy. Yes, second sister is right. Sir is indeed very good in that aspect. It's not something we can handle alone. Lady Shui hurriedly said to Xiao Yin, "Sir is working hard outside for our happiness. There are many things he needs to consider. We're just serving him. If we can't satisfy him in this aspect, then aren't we too useless?" Among the women, Lady Xiang, who became Yang Qindong's woman one step ahead of Hu Yin, also expressed her attitude. They did not know when it started, or maybe it was yesterday, but they had automatically made a list. Hu Yin was Yang Qindong's first wife, so she was naturally the eldest sister. Xiao Yin had been with Yang Qindong the longest, so she was naturally the second sister. Lady Shui was the third sister, and Lady Xiang was the fourth sister. As for whether there would be a fifth sister after that, it was already set in stone. Xiao Yin had said that there was a girl named Luan Xiaoyu in their hometown who also liked Yang Qindong very much. Yang Qindong also liked her, but because she was too young, they still had to wait. If there was a fifth sister, then who knew if there would be a sixth sister and a seventh sister? However, seeing that Yang Qindong was so young and had such a big family business, It was not surprising that there would be sisters joining him. Hu Yin didn't expect that she would immediately be met with the common resistance of her 3 younger sisters when she said Yang Qindong's fault in a fit of pique. She quickly changed her words and said, "I don't mean to blame him. It's because things came too suddenly and I can't accept it. So, it's normal that you can't accept it. I don't blame Big Sister for having such thoughts. However, from now on, we sisters will not forgive anyone who says anything bad about Sir. Especially Big Sister. You must set an example for us." Xiao Yin said this with a rare serious expression. In her heart, Yang Qindong was the sky, the earth, and her everything. Chapter 169. Oh, I got it. Hu Yin, who had clearly suffered a loss, was now like a child who had done something wrong. She lowered her head and pursed her lips. However, it had to be said that after such a conversation, she had diluted the matter of sleeping together. She, who had been persuaded, had also begun to consider Yang Qindong. At the foot of Chicken Crow Mountain, Yang Qindong had just returned from his morning run when he was stopped by Seventh Sister, Yang Duo. "What's the matter, Seventh Sister? Did someone bully you?" Yang Qindong pretended to be angry when he saw the anger in Yang Duo's eyes. Her eyes weren't eyes, and her nose wasn't nose. But in reality, he knew very well what Seventh Sister was here for and what she wanted to say. "Sixth brother, aren't you going too far? I heard that last night you... What happened last night? Did Seventh Sister not rest well? If so, go back and have a good rest now. If you want to go back to the Yang family village, I can send someone to send you back now. As for other things, let's not talk about them." Yang Qindong saw that the other party was bluntly talking about what happened last night and seemed to want to interfere in his family matters. Yang Qindong used words to block her. In the end, he still had to rely on himself to live his own life. As for other people's opinions, it was just a one-sided opinion and did not represent anything. Perhaps Yang Qindong was very easy to talk to when it did not involve matters of principle. However, when it came to some matters, his words carried enormous weight. Once he made a decision, he would not change it. Yang Qindong's tone suddenly became a little stiff. Yang Duo could not accept it for a moment. Sixth brother, you've changed? It's not that I've changed. It's just that Seventh Sister has never seriously understood me. Yang Qindong shook his head and looked at Yang Duo very seriously. They were family and had a blood relationship, so he would not watch anyone bully his Seventh Sister. However, this was not a reason for the other party to interfere in his life. With just one sentence, Yang Duo suddenly became speechless. Yes, she really did not understand Yang Qindong. Ever since her youngest brother had appeared in the capital, she had always been surprised by his appearance. Some matters seemed reckless, but they ended with a cause and effect. Some matters seemed unsolvable, but as long as Sixth brother made a move, he would always be able to grasp the crux of the matter and solve it in one step. As a woman, she was only judging from her own point of view. But was her point of view really correct? Even Hu Yin, as the mistress of the house, did not express any doubts. What reason and authority did he have to say anything? "I'm sorry, Sixth brother. I'm thinking too much. I think I should go back to the tent and have a good rest." Yang Duo suddenly felt that her behavior was a bit reckless. For a moment, she wanted to find a quiet place to think about it. After saying this, Yang Duo turned around and left. This time, Yang Qindong didn't stop him. He knew that there were some things that he had to figure out himself. Seventh Sister, who had already experienced a failed marriage, was most afraid of being hurt in this aspect. Speaking of which, she reminded her out of kindness. However, Yang Duo forgot one thing. Yang Qindong was not Wang Go. After Yang Duo left, Yang Qindong strode back into the tent. After what had happened to Seventh Sister, he was even prepared to be scolded by Hu Yin. This was his woman, and he should love her. No matter what Hu Yin said, he was prepared to not talk back. When he entered the tent, Xiao Yin and the other 2 girls had already left. Only the maid Xiaoqing was there to dress Hu Yin. When she saw Yang Qindong enter, Xiaoqing quickly bowed and said, "Master, and how about this? You can leave for a moment. I have something to discuss with Madam." Yang Qindong smiled and nodded to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing naturally knew that she would spend the rest of her life with Hu Yin and Yang Chendong. How could she dare to refuse such a small request? She agreed and immediately left. When only the two of them were left in the tent, Hu Yin lowered her head with a blush. Hu Yin was shy. After all, she and her three sisters served Yang Chendong last night. It was a shameful thing. She couldn't adapt for a while and couldn't face it. However, when Yang Chendong saw this scene, he thought that she was angry at him. He hurriedly squatted down and said, "Yin'er, it's my fault. I didn't consider your feelings. I was too agitated, so no." His mouth was suddenly blocked by Hu Yan's small hand. "Lulang, don't say that. As your wife, I didn't consider your feelings. Last night, I was willing." The more she spoke, the lower her head. In the end, her head was about to plunge into Yang Chendong's arms. He didn't expect such a result. For a moment, Yang Chendong was overjoyed. "Really? Yin-er, you're the best. I love you so much." In ancient times, the word love was not so easily spoken. Even when husband and wife spoke words of love, they rarely used the word love. However, when Yang Chendong said the word love, Hu Yin was overjoyed. She felt that she had made the right decision by listening to Qiao Yin and the others. In her happiness, she said happily, "Lulang, I didn't understand you before. You were too tired. As your wife, as long as you're happy, you can do whatever you want in the future." Yang Chendong had already thought it through. It must be Qiao Yin and the others who did Hu Yan's work that resulted in such a delicious result. He was instantly even more satisfied with Qiao Yin and the others. Originally, he had to spend a lot of effort to persuade them. Unexpectedly, he didn't need to say anything and the matter was resolved. In his happiness, Yang Chendong held Hu Yan's little face and kissed it. With this kiss, Hu Yan felt her entire body go soft. She said shyly and carefully, "Husband, if you want to, can you wait until nighttime? After all, it's broad daylight. If others find out, I'm afraid it won't be good." Seeing that Hu Yan seemed to be a little moved, Yang Chendong laughed. However, he also knew that Hu Yan's skin was probably very thin. At least, it wasn't as thick as his. If he didn't let go of this matter, it was very likely that it would cause resentment. Therefore, he intentionally changed the topic. First, he talked about the matter between Xiaoqing and Sun Chuang. They're not young anymore. As their master, you should find a time to arrange their marriage. We'll take care of all the expenses. In short, you can't treat Xiaoqing unfairly. After all, she's been with you for so many years, hasn't she? Thank you, sixth young master. Seeing that Yang Chendong had considered the matter so carefully, Hu Yin was very moved and said, "We're husbands. In the future, there's no need to say thanks. Everything I do for you is what I should do. By the way, my seventh sister seems to have some complaints about what happened last night. Do you think you should personally go and have a good talk with her? I don't want her to misunderstand me." Yang Chendong thought about it and decided to leave the job of persuading seventh sister to Hu Yin. If Hu Yin took the initiative to persuade her, it would be more effective than 100 words from him. Hearing that seventh sister had complaints, Hu Yan's heart was moved. This was seventh sister standing up for her. She didn't even hesitate to blame her own brother. This sister-in-law was absolutely competent. Hu Yin agreed, and Yang Chendong's heart was completely relieved. Although there were some things that he didn't ask others to understand, they were still family, and understanding was always better than opposing. Just as Yang Chendong was enjoying the happiness of having multiple wives and gaining the understanding of his wife, several groups of fast horses were galloping through the streets of the capital. These brave soldiers had banners with the word XN written on their backs. As soon as they entered the capital, their faces were gloomy as they spurred their horses forward. Many scheming people had a bad premonition when a messenger didn't shout the news of victory from 600 miles away. This should be a battle report from the front line. If it wasn't a victory report, what could it be? At this time, in the imperial court, Zhu Qiyu had already changed into a dragon robe and was sitting on a huge golden dragon throne. He was looking at the officials and listening to them report on the important matters of the court. Zhu Qiyu, who had been emperor for some time, had gradually come to like this feeling of being high and mighty. Although he didn't have complete power and had the final say, he had basically controlled the situation. Out of the 6 ministries, 2 of the ministers had been replaced by his favored candidates, Minister of Revenue Jin Lian and Minister of War Yiming. These 2 had replaced Wang Zhuo and Kuang Yi, who had followed Emperor Ying to Nanjing. These 2 new ministers were very grateful to Zhu Qiyu for his favor. Naturally, if this substitute emperor had any requests, they would do their best to satisfy them. Of the 6 ministries, the Minister of Works, Shi Pu, had always been a fence-sitter. When Wang Jun had been present, he had often tried to curry favor with him. Now that Jin Ying had become a head eunuch, he had long since leaned over. In this way, he could also be considered a member of the substitute emperor's faction. Out of the 6 divisions, 3 of them were on her side. Zhu Qiyu felt even more satisfied. Zhu Qiyu had come to court in a happy mood, intending to show off his skills and compete with Zhu Qizhen in governing the country. However, all of this ambition was shattered when a messenger ran into the imperial court to deliver an urgent military report. Important military intelligence from the front line. As soon as the messenger entered the main hall, he knelt on the ground with a thud. It could be seen that he had been running nonstop all this time, so much so that he was a little exhausted. Speak. Hearing that it was a military report from the front line, Zhu Qiyu straightened his body and looked at the soldier with a face full of expectation. Your Majesty, Admiral Shi Hong was ambushed by Walla's army. The army suffered heavy losses, but Admiral broke out of the encirclement and is resisting the enemy cavalry's advance. Please let me report this to Your Majesty first, and ask for reinforcements to be sent. Prepare for a big battle. After the messenger finished speaking in one breath, he felt his vision blur and then fainted from exhaustion. Chapter 170. Quickly, carry him away and treat him. Jining stood at Zhu Qiyu's side, looking at the unconscious soldiers as she spoke to the human soldiers outside the imperial court. After saying this, she felt a shadow flicker at her side. Who else could it be but Dai Zong? Just as Zhu Qiyu was about to show off his skills and become a famous monarch to unify the world, he suddenly heard that the front line had been defeated. At this moment, how could he still remain calm? His expression changed greatly, so much so that his body became a little shaky. Dear ministers, how many troops can we mobilize now? Zhu Qiyu forced himself to stay alert upon hearing this report, and he turned his eyes to the new Minister of War, Yiming, hoping that he could give a satisfactory result. Yiming, courtesy named Zixin, was the son of Yiji, a man of high intelligence. After ascending the throne, Dai Zong had sought the favor of the Minister of Rights and was promoted to Minister of War. He was an official who had been promoted on the front lines. When he first arrived at the Bureau of Military Personnel, his seniority was still shallow, so he did not have complete control over the Bureau of Military Personnel. Now that a problem had arisen, Yiming felt his head ache. But Yiming was still a capable person, and he quickly calmed down. After some thought, he went to the Bureau of Military Personnel and looked at the reports from the various factions and calculated a result. Your Majesty, there are currently only 5,000 soldiers in the capital. If we continue to urgently mobilize them, we should be able to mobilize another 5,000 soldiers in 3 days. In half a month, we should be able to gather an army of 50,000 soldiers. For the mighty capital of the great Ming dynasty to have so few soldiers was a result that Zhu Qiyu had not expected. But he knew that since Ming dared to say this, there was no doubt about this result. If this was really the case, how should they deal with the arrival of the Walla's army? Speaking of which, there were many reasons for the current situation in the capital. Unlike in history, after the Tumu fortress incident, Dai Zong had listened to Yu Qian's words and adopted a defensive strategy. This had led to the defense of the capital and the defeat of the Walla's army. Because of Yang Qindong's arrival, Yu Qian had been invited to Tsuxian City long ago to serve him. With the idea gone, Shi Hong took command of the army and sent out the majority of the soldiers in and around the capital. Moreover, Zhu Qizhen had declared himself emperor in Nanjing and taken away a portion of his soldiers, leaving the capital suddenly empty of soldiers. Naturally, They were helpless against Walla's army. At this moment, not only Zhu Qiyu, but the other officials were also staring at each other, unable to find a better idea. As the saying goes, even the cleverest housewife cannot cook without rice. Without sufficient military strength, how can one fight a war? Can one rely on words? If they could win with their mouths, there would be no need for the country to support a large number of troops. Among the ministers, Su Yozhin's eyes kept darting around. Relying on his relationship with Yang Chendong, he was promoted again. He was no longer a part of the imperial censor, but went to Taichung Temple to become a Shaoqing. He was in charge of the country's sacrificial ceremonies and was a fourth-grade official. The reason why he was promoted so quickly was naturally because Yang Chendong had helped him with a lot of money. It was also because the original Shaoqing of Taichung Temple, Huang Yangzheng, went to Nanjing with Ing Zong, so there was a vacancy. As a fourth-grade official, Su Yozhin already had a stage to display his ambitions. At this moment, when he saw the emperor and the other ministers' difficult expressions, he really wanted to stand up and propose to move the capital to the south. After all, a gentleman would not stand under a dangerous wall. In fact, in history, Su Yozhin was the main official who proposed this idea. But now this idea just flashed in his mind. It was not for anything else, but because Ing Zong had already gone to Nanjing. At this time, what would they mean by going there? It was likely that an internal conflict would be inevitable. And Zhu Qiyu, who was leading the defeated army, really did not know what the chances of winning were. Unable to bring up the matter of moving the capital to the south, Su Yozhin's eyes darted around as he thought of another feasible idea. At this moment, when the other ministers were still thinking about what to do, he had already taken out his ceremonial tablet. He stepped forward and said, "I have something to report." Minister Su, quickly say it. Seeing that everyone had no idea, but one minister still had a suggestion, Zhu Qiyu suddenly had a feeling of hope. "Your Majesty, the army at the front has suddenly lost, and the capital is in danger. At this time, the first thing to do is to mobilize the troops near the capital to save the emperor. The second thing to do is to choose a general who can lead the army to block the enemy outside the city wall. This will ensure the stability of the great Ming dynasty." That's right, mobilizing the troops after, choosing the general before. Zhu Qiyu felt that it was very reasonable. He immediately said to the Minister of War, "Yiming, Minister Yi, you can send a letter to mobilize the troops near the capital to protect the capital." "Yes, Your Majesty," Yiming replied, and then left the court with his ceremonial tablet. "Good, now everyone, who can lead the army to fight against the Walla army?" Zhu Qiyu's eyes swept across the ministers in the court. The desire in his eyes was very obvious. However, when he asked this question, the entire court fell silent. First, the Tumu Fort's army of 500,000 suffered a crushing defeat, and then General Shi Heng's army of 150,000 was also defeated. Right now, there were only a few thousand men left in the imperial court. Even if they waited for 3 days, their military strength would still be no more than 10,000. How could they resist the elite Walla cavalry? The Walla cavalry could defeat the great Ming army again and again. At this moment, the ministers' faces changed at the mention of this tiger. The crowd of officials didn't speak. This made Zhu Qiyu extremely anxious. What's wrong? Our magnificent great Ming dynasty actually has a great general who can command the 3 armies? Valuing the civil and despising the military had always been the basic national policy of the Ming dynasty. In fact, it was not only the Ming dynasty. It was the same from the earliest Han dynasty to the Tang dynasty and the Song dynasty. After all, the military was strong and the civil was weak, which was not good for the stability of the country. In the Ming dynasty, this situation was even more obvious. Normally, when the military met the civil officials, it was very rare for the military to be able to straighten their backs. It was just like Shi Sheng in the past. However, a Qianhu of the Brocade Guard could bully a famous general, Zhang Fu, and invade his land. It was no wonder that when Zhu Qiyu asked this question, the civil officials and the military officials did not speak. Is there really no brave general who dares to face the Walla army? Zhu Qiyu asked loudly in anger. At this moment, he really wanted to roar, "If none of you go, do you want us to personally lead the army?" However, when he thought of his elder brother Zhu Qijian's end, this thought quickly disappeared without a trace. He did not want to be the second emperor who lost an army. What if he was captured by the enemy when the time came? What should he do? Zhu Qiyu's face was full of anger. He criticized the officials that he usually raised for being useless. Jining saw that the situation in the court had worsened and reminded him in a low voice, "Your Majesty, this matter needs to be discussed at length. It is better to dismiss the court first and wait until tomorrow morning to make a decision." The courtiers were not completely loyal to him. The most important thing was that there was still Zhu Qijian in Nanjing for everyone to rely on. Even if he really got angry here, not only would it be useless, it was likely to lead to a backlash from the courtiers. If they collectively left, then his position as the emperor would come to an end. Forget it, forget it. Everyone, go back and think about it carefully. Wait until tomorrow morning. No matter what, you must choose a candidate. Dismiss the court. Zhu Qiyu was very helpless. Although he had become the emperor, this emperor did not seem to be as powerful as the previous Ming dynasty emperors. After the officials shouted "Long live the emperor," they left the court and left the palace. After Su Yozhen left the palace hall, she quickly contacted the people of the security bureau and reported the situation in the court today. At this time, Yang Shindong had already returned to the Yang family manor from the foot of Jiming Mountain with the women. Originally, the women wanted to play for a few more days, but tomorrow was the time for Hu Yin to return home. This was an important matter for the first madam, so Yang Shindong naturally had to take care of it. He returned to the Yang family manor in advance to make preparations. On the way back, the people of the security bureau came over and reported everything that happened in the court. The group had stopped. Yang Shindong stood on the side of the road and listened to the report of the staff of the security bureau. In the carriage, Qiao Yin looked at this scene through the curtain and couldn't help but say, "Sir is busy with important matters again. Unfortunately, we can't help much. The only thing we can do is to make him happy when he sees us. Don't make him angry and satisfy all his requests." "You're right, second sister." Lady Shui and Lady Xiang hurriedly agreed. Looking at Hu Yin, although she didn't say anything at this time, from her concerned eyes, it could be seen that she had accepted the fact that she slept with him. Even if the other women could understand Yang Shindong as the wife, why couldn't she understand? On the side of the road, after carefully listening to what happened in the court, Yang Shindong sighed. Although the wheel of history had changed because of his appearance, the defense of the capital still had to start as scheduled. Since history had changed, Yang Shindong couldn't accurately predict what would happen, and naturally couldn't make plans in advance. But since the emperor asked to recommend a general to lead the army, he was somewhat interested. First, this was a good opportunity for him to show his talent. Second, it was a good opportunity to consolidate his strength and expand his influence. Third, and most importantly, Yang Shindong would never allow the other races to have any ideas about the Han people and cause any destruction. Back then, Kuang Yi and Wang Zhua, the two ministers of the six ministries, wrote to him, saying that he had saved Yingzong's life and that he would have more room to develop in Nanjing than in the capital. The environment would also be better, but Yang Shindong still refused. That was because there was a strong enemy in the capital, Walla, while Nanjing was very safe. Chapter 171. It couldn't be said that Yang Shindong had appeared for the sake of war, but he had indeed appeared for the sake of the Han's rise to power. Since there were people who wanted to harm the Han, why couldn't he teach them a lesson? Presumably, after this battle, Zhu Qiyu would owe him a big favor. This would only be beneficial to his future plans. All right, Marquis knows about this matter. How about this? Go back and tell Su Yozhen to recommend Marquis to lead the army tomorrow morning. Yang Shindong analyzed the situation and felt that the time was right. It was time to step forward, so he informed his subordinates of his decision. Yes, The staff member of the security bureau quickly left after receiving confirmation. Yang Qindong quickly returned to the spacious carriage. As soon as he entered, the women began to chatter incessantly. Knowing that there were some things that couldn't be hidden, Yang Qindong maintained a smile on his face as he said, "The soldiers on the front lines have been defeated. The Walla army should be arriving at the capital soon." The women had only asked out of curiosity. Even if Yang Qindong hadn't said anything, they would have understood. After all, the idea of a male protagonist had been passed down for thousands of years. But unexpectedly, Yang Qindong didn't have any intention of hiding it from them. He really did tell them about it, but the result was so shocking. They're about to reach the capital? Then we, as a descendant of the Hu clan, Hu Yin was naturally more sensitive to political matters than the other women. "You don't need to worry. With Sixth Brother here, no one in this world can harm you. You just need to properly stay in the Yang clan manner." Yang Qindong spoke with an incomparably resolute voice. At this moment, Yang Qindong was so confident that the four women were mesmerized and unable to extricate themselves. Sensing that the four women weren't panicking anymore, Yang Qindong smiled and said, "All right, let's do what we need to do now. The immortal abode and realm beyond heaven need to operate normally to calm the people. If possible, if there's a property market nearby that's willing to sell at a suitable price, we can buy it. It's also time to expand our operations." To ordinary people, war was naturally a disaster. But to some people, it was filled with countless business opportunities. Everything depended on your position, what kind of information you could obtain, and what kind of authority you held. Yang Qindong didn't lack any of these three things. If he couldn't maximize his benefits in this situation, then all his previous preparations and plans would be meaningless. Bye. This was the first order Yang Qindong gave to Hu Yin and the others, as well as the first mission of his wives. For the sake of making the best of the situation, a total of 5 million taels of silver had been moved out of the cellar of the Yang clan manor. This was all prepared by Yang Qindong before the construction of the Ethwood fortress. It was all for the sake of dealing with the current situation. Tell Lung Song to pick up the pace. Be more daring. We have to reach the capital within 5 days. Yang Qindong looked at Lung Feng and his brothers, who were carrying so much silver that their hands were about to go limp. Even though he was giving orders to Tiger's Mane, he was thinking of another problem. If moving silver was so troublesome, it seemed like it was time to consider the issue of banknotes. The appearance of banknotes was a huge step forward in the history of currency. Some people in the world of currency believe that the origin of banknotes in China could be traced back to the white deer skin coin of Emperor Wu's time and the flying money of the Tang dynasty. The flying money was actually just a currency exchange business. It did not enter into circulation and did not function as a currency, so it was not a true banknote. The banknotes of Sichuan and Chengdu during the Northern Song dynasty were the beginning of the true banknotes. But for various reasons, the system was not perfect, and in the end, it was not developed on a large scale. In the Yuan dynasty and Ming dynasty, although the banknote system was further improved, it was still difficult for it to be accepted by the people. At the end of the Qing dynasty, the Qing dynasty's economy was in trouble, and the treasury was empty. In order to raise money for the military, they had to change their original plan of not printing banknotes for 200 years. In the third year of Xianfeng, 1853, the first banknote of the Ministry of Revenue was printed. This time, the banknotes of the Ministry of Revenue were divided into 5 types of silver: 1 tael, 3 taels, 5 taels, 10 taels, and 50 taels. In the middle of the banknotes were written in both Manchu and Chinese characters, Ministry of Revenue, official banknote. It was from then on that banknotes became one of the paper currencies that could be circulated. Although the Ming dynasty also had official banknotes, most of them were internal transactions between officials. Ordinary people and even merchants rarely participated in them. The imperfection of the system meant that these banknotes could be turned into waste paper at any time. Who would dare to use silver to exchange for them? Not to mention other people, but even Yang Qindong himself did not trust the Ming dynasty government. This government was made up of officials, and the speed at which it changed was so fast that it made one's eyes blur. Who would dare to take out all of their wealth to exchange for banknotes? Perhaps the moment one exchanged for it, the Genie guards and the East faction guards would come to raid one's home. For example, Yang Shandong's 5 million taels of silver had never been exposed. He believed that if he really trusted the great Ming dynasty, Wang Zhen would have already made a move on him and would not have waited until it had developed to such a scale. It was because the banknote system was not recognized by many that Yang Shandong wanted to do something about it. In his later life, he had seen the power of the state-owned banks, so he could naturally see the huge benefits involved. As for the risks, with the Yangtze's new army as his backing, he was not afraid of others plotting against him. Perhaps he was still thinking that if others had such thoughts, he would have a good reason to deal with them. While Yang Shandong was still thinking about his grand plans, the capital was already in chaos. As the officials returned home from the court, the news of the Ming dynasty's defeat spread like wildfire. For a time, all sorts of things were said, and in a state of panic, a small number of people left the capital and headed south. Although there were not many of them, most of them were merchants. They had all left in fear after hearing that the Ming dynasty's army was defeated and that the Walla was about to arrive at the capital. When these people left, most of them took with them a large amount of cash from their homes. Perhaps it was said that merchants valued profits and patriotism was not as reliable as profits. The departure of a portion of merchants caused the already tense atmosphere in the capital to become even more chaotic. Even some of the common people began to pack up. After 2 consecutive defeats and the loss of the Ming dynasty's elites, they did not have much confidence that they could defeat the Walla. If they did not leave, they would most likely meet with misfortune. Not to mention, in the afternoon of that day, there was a rumor that the Vala cavalry drank human blood and ate human flesh to survive. Once captured, the women would naturally be humiliated and the men and children would become food in their mouths. This news was far more effective than people saying that the Walla cavalry was brave and good in battle. The direct result was that a large number of people gathered at the city gate. If it was not for the city gate being closed at the time, who knew how many people would have left? The so-called news of the Walla eating humans was naturally released by the Security Bureau in order to attract big hoodlums and fish in troubled waters. However, this action seemed to be a little too big. At that time, the common people were not well informed and their knowledge was limited. Thus, they really believed the rumors, and in a short period of time, a wave of people left the city. The situation at the city gate quickly spread to the palace and into the ears of the acting patriarch, Zhu Qiyu. When he heard that his people were so panicked, the new emperor was scared out of his wits. If the capital became an empty city, how could it resist the Walla army? Could it be that the new emperor, was going to abandon the city and flee? If that was the case, where could he go? Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect was probably waiting for him to make a fool of himself. Go and find out who spread the rumors. After we catch them, we will cut them into pieces. Zhu Qiyu's eyes seemed to spit fire as he spoke. Your Majesty, the embroidered uniform guards and the Easter Depot will naturally investigate this matter. However, what is more important is how to pacify the people in the city. If these people really do leave the capital, then Jining, who had been urgently summoned, did not elaborate on what would happen. But one could imagine that if the capital became empty, the emperor would truly be a loner. In that case, this emperor would have undoubtedly failed. No, we can't let them leave. Beloved subject, do you have a good plan? Zhu Qiyu naturally understood the severity of the situation if things continued to develop like this. So he urgently asked Jining if he had any good ideas. Your Majesty, this subject is incompetent and does not have a better plan for now. However, in order to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control, this subject suggests that we temporarily close the city gates and allow only small towns to enter and exit. Moreover, we must conduct inspections and forbid the common people from taking money out of the city. In this way, the family property will naturally remain here and will not leave. As for how to deal with the Wallace soldiers, your Majesty must preside over tomorrow's morning court and discuss with the other officials a plan. Jining had never seen anything like this before. Although he had followed several emperors and seen their ability to govern, this was mostly a power struggle between the emperor and the court officials. This was the first time he had ever seen an army pressing down on the capital. Zhu Qiyu was somewhat panicked, but he felt that Jin Ying's words were somewhat reasonable. He immediately agreed and placed all his hopes on tomorrow's morning court. After a sleepless night, the morning court began as scheduled. At the same time, the main gates of the capital were opened to side gates in the name of preventing Wallace spies from sneaking in. Strict inspections were also carried out, and if anyone was found to be leaving the capital with large amounts of money, they would be arrested on the spot for all sorts of unnecessary crimes. Although this method was somewhat forceful, it truly did prevent the common people from leaving the capital. Chapter 172. It was under such a tense atmosphere that Yang Chundong entered the capital from the Yang family manor. It was the day of the return trip. He came to the Hu mansion with his new wife, Hu Yin, to visit his relatives. The inspection for leaving the city was very strict, but for entering the city, it was much more relaxed. This point was tantamount to slapping himself in the face, proving how ridiculous the so-called catching spies was. Since Yang Qindong became marquis, the lineup when he went out had become much larger. It was the same this time. The number of servants and guards alone had reached 30, and there were nearly 100 strong men and maids carrying boxes. From this point of view, Yang Qindong had already violated the rules. According to the law of the Great Ming Dynasty, a marquis could only take 8 attendants at most when he went out, but he had 30 guards. Even if he took more than 100 strong men and maids with him, the team was indeed too large. If it was in normal times, those imperial censors would probably impeach him again. But now, the capital was in danger. Who was in the mood to worry about this? Of course, even in peacetime, Yang Qindong would not change what he had decided. He came to create rules, not to follow them. Besides, in order to marry Hu Yin, Yang Qindong had given Hu family at least 2 million things, which had once shocked the capital. But in the end, those were filial gifts from Yang Qindong, but this time, Hu Yin was filial to her parents. The meaning was naturally different. Of course, Hu Yin would feel proud and happy that so many good things were given to her family. But after all, she was already a member of the Yang family. Out of consideration for her husband, she still said the words of refusal. In this regard, Yang Qindong reached out to scratch her nose and said with a smile, "Silly girl, you are my woman now. So what if I give you some things? Besides, your sick son has nothing but a lot of money. Don't worry. After these things are given out, your sick son will not become poor." This little joke made Hu Yin inexplicably happy, and her nose was a little sore. Although money might not be able to prove anything, wouldn't taking care of his face and being forthright and magnanimous prove his importance? Thinking of this, she sighed that she had married the right person and chosen the right man. The vast army entered the capital. If it were any other time, such a scene would definitely attract a lot of onlookers and even a lot of discussions and gossip. At the same time, it would also garner a lot of envious gazes. But at this time, everyone was thinking about how to leave the capital to take refuge. Who would have the time to care about such trivial matters and watch such a show? Seated in the spacious and luxurious carriage, Yang Qindong would occasionally look out the window, gathering all the information in his mind and gaining a more direct understanding of the situation in the capital. Hu Yin nestled in Yang Qindong's arms. It was rare that there was no one else in the carriage, so she became somewhat unrestrained. She completely disregarded her reserved appearance and leaned her head against Yang Qindong's chest, feeling the strong and powerful heartbeat with a face full of happiness. When the carriage stopped in front of the Hu estate and Hu Yin got off, her face was still flushed with happiness. When she saw her mother waiting in the hall, she excitedly ran over. In the imperial court, the atmosphere today was exceptionally tense. In the past, in order to express His Majesty, The emperor would first listen to the memorials of his subordinates, and then give a few suggestions when he had an idea, demonstrating his supreme authority. But today, before the officials could speak, even after they had just knelt down and chanted, "Long live the emperor," he asked anxiously, "Dear officials, do you have any ideas about the candidate to lead the army and the strategy to retreat the enemy? Do you all have any ideas?" Thus, the entire court fell silent. If one were to say that a great Confucian scholar who knew the 4 books and 5 classics, he could naturally name many people. But when it came to driving back the enemy and leading the army, how could it be so easy? Speaking of which, it had been a long time since there had been a major foreign war. Even if there were some wars, they were only small skirmishes or internal conflicts. For those kinds of battles, as long as the enemy was pressured, there was no need for any techniques. But this time, facing the elite cavalry of Walla who had repeatedly defeated them, hundreds of thousands of troops were thrown in twice, and the result was a great defeat, which led to a situation where there was a shortage of soldiers. So, how could they resist the enemy? Not to mention that recommending a candidate to be an official and a general were 2 completely different things. When recommending an official, even if the other party was not qualified, they could casually find a reason and say that they did not know the official very well to get away with it. At most, they could bribe the officials and use some money, and the matter would be resolved as a small matter. But recommending a general to fight against the powerful army of Walla, if they did not do well, they would lose their heads, and even worse, the recommender would also be punished. So, who would do such a recommendation easily? On one hand, they did not want to cause trouble, but more importantly, they did not have a suitable candidate in mind. In their eyes, the Tile army that even Zong himself could not defeat was already an undefeatable army, an army that no one could defeat. The officials were all mute and did not make a sound. This made the emperor anxious and Zhu Qiyu angry. What? You don't even have a suitable candidate? You claim to be the pillars of the country, and according to you, you have everything in the world in your hands, and you are omnipotent. But now, is it so difficult to recommend a person to lead the army? If that's the case, are you lying to me? In anger, Zhu Qiyu wanted to label the officials as deceiving the emperor. In this way, even if he used this reason to kill a few officials, the others would not be able to say anything. Feeling the anger of the emperor, the officials were panicking, and at the same time, they looked at each other and then quickly transitioned in their minds to a candidate to lead the army. But no matter how hard they thought, it was difficult to find a suitable person. What? Seeing that the officials still did not say a word, in anger, Zhu Qiyu decided to kill a few people as a sacrifice to the flag. Some people were like this. If they were not forced to this point, they would not know how powerful they were. Just as Zhu Qiju's gaze swept over and was thinking about who to kill to make an example, someone in the crowd suddenly said, "Emperor, this official has a candidate to recommend." "Oh, who? Who are you recommending? Come forward." Zhu Qiyu, who was about to explode, suddenly saw hope and was naturally very happy. His eyes searched, and his voice became very anxious. "As you wish." The newly appointed vice minister of Taichung Temple, Su Yozhen, who had received the emperor's order, stepped forward with a face full of confidence. The officials were also curious about who stepped forward at this time, but when they saw that it was Su Yozhen who was in charge of the sacrifice, they all showed a puzzled expression. This person used to be an imperial censor, although he had impeached some people and had a slight reputation, but in the end, he was not a ranked official, and it was difficult for him to enter the eyes of others. If it were not for the 2 emperors this time, it would be impossible for him to be promoted from a 6th-rank official to a 4th-rank vice minister of Taichung Temple. Yesterday, this person had been in the limelight once, and at that time, his colleagues had a whole new level of respect for him. They did not expect that he would speak again today. Could it be that he really had a suitable candidate in mind to lead the army? Could it be that he was really a person with a military strategy? Under the gaze of the officials, under the eager eyes of the emperor, Su Yozhen, who was holding the ceremonial tablet, stepped forward with a face full of confidence, knelt and said, This official recommends a person. He has fought with the Walla cavalry and has not been defeated and retreated unscathed. With him, the so-called small foreign tribes are not a problem and can be swept away like a spider web in a room. Su Yozhin's flattery made the ministers in the imperial court even more surprised, who had fought with the Walla army and not been defeated. Even Shi Hung, who was given the title of Taidu and Wuching Count, was also defeated. Could it be that there was really a general more powerful than this person? If it was true, why hadn't they heard of it? The officials were puzzled, but the Emperor Zhu Qiyu did not think much about it. Right now, he was anxious to find a way to solve the problem, as long as he could force the enemy to retreat. As for where he came from and what his current position was, he did not care about it. Good. My great Ming is really full of talents, but I don't know the name of this person. Where's he now? What is his official position? Zhu Qiyu asked anxiously, but Su Yozhin answered indifferently. Replying to the emperor, this person is now in the capital, Yang Qindong, the loyal marquis. Su Shaoqing, be careful with your words. Among the officials, someone quickly made a reproachful attitude. This person was an important official in the court, the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao. Yang Qindong married his granddaughter, and the two families had a very close relationship. Now that someone recommended his grandson-in-law to lead the army to war, of course, he would be unhappy. This was war, and people would die, not doing business. At worst, it would just be a loss of money. That's right, Su Shaoqing, don't be too impatient. This is leading the army to war, a matter of national importance, not a place to settle personal grudges. Hu Zhongning also stood in the court. In order to solve the crisis, Zhu Qiyu had specially ordered all the fifth-rank officials in the capital to come to court. As the imperial guardian of the embroidered uniform guard, he naturally had the qualifications to stand here. He was already Yang Qindong's father-in-law, so he naturally could not ignore his son-in-law's matters. His words directly pointed out that there was a problem with Su Yozhin's motives. In fact, most people in the court remembered that when Su Yozhin was still an imperial censor, he had once impeached Yang Qindong for going to the red light district. After that, although Yang Qindong was unharmed, he was promoted. With this precedent as an example, it was no wonder that Hu Zhongning would think this way and even dare to point it out in front of the court. Su Yozhin, who was being rebuked by both Hu Xiao and Hu Zhongning, did not panic in the slightest. On the contrary, he maintained a slight smile and said, "Yes, when this official was an imperial censor, I truly did impeach the loyal marquis, but that was only out of duty, not because of personal grudges. Now, this official is recommending the loyal marquis both out of duty and to repay the emperor's kindness in recognizing my worth. Moreover, this official can take responsibility for his words. If the loyal marquis is unable to stop the enemy outside the capital, this official is willing to take full responsibility." Chapter 173. Take full responsibility. When he said this, the entire court was in an uproar. This was no longer a recommendation, but a bet on his own life. If he didn't have enough confidence, how would he dare to do such a thing? For a moment, all the officials looked at each other. No one dared to doubt whether Su Yozhin had bad motives. After all, if you wanted to harm your enemy or opponent, there were many ways. But he wouldn't choose this kind of responsible statement. Wasn't that taking the initiative to jump into a sinking ship and seeking his own death? Su Yozhin's words made all the officials speechless. There was a feeling of speechlessness, and they didn't know what to say. Zhu Qiyu, who saw all of this, was very happy in his heart. Regardless of whether Yang Qindong was suitable to lead the army or not, at least someone had recommended a candidate. This was a good sign. He looked at Su Yozhin with a praising gaze and said, "Good. Minister Su is loyal to the country. Your heart is praiseworthy. But I don't know how you are so sure that the Marquis of Loyalty can take on this heavy responsibility. Your Majesty, please allow this official to report." After receiving Yang Qindong's reply yesterday, he also received a lot of information from the Security Bureau. After sorting it out, he also thought about what to say for half a night. Now that it was time to show off, he immediately boasted in front of Dai Zong and all the officials. From Su Yozhen's mouth, everyone knew that Yang Qindong saved Ing Zong, Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the other 9 officials. Only then did they know that the Marquis of Loyalty didn't rely on luck, but a mercenary army with a high price. They were using the latest firearms, which were not difficult to fire continuously. Moreover, they were extremely accurate. It was because of this army of 100 people that they were able to save the lives of Ing Zong and the others in the chaos. This was the reason why they were given the title of Count of Loyalty and Courage. After explaining the situation in detail, Su Yozhen immediately kowtowed to the ground and vowed to Zhu Qizhen, "Your Majesty, this official is willing to use my life and the dozens of people in my family as a guarantee. If we can invite the Marquis of Loyalty and the mercenary army, it isn't impossible to withdraw the elite army of the Walla. This official asks for your Majesty's decree." His voice was impassioned and powerful, reverberating throughout the entire palace. Every word and sentence passed into the ears of the emperor and the officials, but at this time, no one agreed. It was obvious that everyone was digesting what Su Yozhen had said and the information she had brought to them. Zhu Qiyu also didn't immediately make a decision. Su Yozhen's words alone were not enough to determine if Yang Qindong really had such an ability. This was a battle to protect the capital. If he made a mistake, he would lose everything he had and his life. If he lost this battle and the capital fell to the enemy, even if he killed Yang Qindong and Su Yozhen, what use would it be? He needed to think about it carefully, so he fell into deep thought. Jining, who was extremely observant, saw that Zhu Qiyu hadn't spoken for a long time. She reminded him in a small voice, "Your Majesty, is it possible to withdraw from court first and discuss this matter at court tomorrow morning?" "Oh, let's end the court session." Zhu Qiyu nodded mechanically. Immediately, a drake-like voice rang out, "Court dismissed." The Hu estate. Yang Qindong had been sitting in the main hall, accompanied by the chief steward of the Hu estate. When Hu Xiao and Hu Zhongning returned, the 3 of them greeted each other. Everyone else is dismissed. Hu Xiao glanced at the steward and Tiger's Mane, who had been standing by Yang Qindong's side like a javelin. The steward withdrew. Tiger's Mane also withdrew after receiving a signal from Yang Qindong. When only the 3 of them were left in the room, Hu Xiao took the initiative to speak. "Loyal Marquis, do you know that someone recommended you to lead the army in the battle against the Walla?" Hu Xiao asked directly, his sharp gaze piercing straight into Yang Qindong's heart. It was unimaginable that an old man in his 70s had so much experience in dealing with the world and pleasing countless people, let alone a young man who wasn't even 20 years old. Such a gaze would make even an old official of the same court panic. Even Hu Zhongning, who was seated next to Hu Xiao, felt a wave of pressure wash over him. However, towards this, Yang Qindong was neither anxious nor slow, and his expression was incomparably indifferent. It was as if these words were not directed at him. "Thank you for your concern, Old Master. Qindong is truly guilty." Calling Hu Xiao Old Master was not a common title at the time. This form of address caused Hu Xiao's expression to freeze. His sharp gaze and stern expression seemed to have faded a lot at this moment. Hu Xiao's aura was no longer overbearing. Yang Qindong spread out his hands and spoke with a sincere expression. "Old Master, father-in-law has something to ask, so I naturally do not dare to hide it. Su Yozhen's intentions are my intentions." "What do you mean?" Yang Qindong's reply caused Hu Zhongning's expression to stiffen. He did not quite understand. On the other hand, his father, Hu Xiao, quickly understood everything. His gaze was filled with obvious surprise. "Su Yozhen is one of your people? When did this happen? Has she ever impeached you before?" "She has been one of my people since before the impeachment." Yang Qindong spoke extremely calmly, as if he was talking about something insignificant. There was not the slightest hint of pride. Controlling a rank 4 official of the imperial court was something to be proud of. However, no matter how one looked at it, he did not seem to care at all. It was as if everything was right and proper. This, Hu Zhongning finally understood. Of course, his face was filled with shock. Hu Dan was also shocked by these words. However, he had been in the imperial court for so many years after all. He quickly understood the crux of the matter. He was also incomparably shocked, but he did not show it on his face. Just by looking at his ability to maintain his composure, it was unknown how much better he was than his son. So that's how it is. It seems that this old man has worried too much. But you arranged for Su Yozhen to do this? How confident are you? Hu Xiao knew that Yang Chendong was playing a very big game of chess, but he did not know exactly what he was going to do. He only knew that this grandson-in-law of his was filled with confidence. I don't dare to hide it from old master. I am 100% confident, Yang Chendong respectfully replied, while inwardly praising Hu Xiao's reaction and judgment. 100%? This answer also startled Hu Xiao. His eyes lit up as if he was going to reevaluate Yang Chendong at this moment. Since ancient times, no one had dared to say that they were 100% confident in war. Even if they knew that victory was certain, they would only say that they were 99% confident. This was all because reality was unpredictable and constantly changing. This was especially true when it came to war. Often, if one did not consider everything thoroughly, it could change the entire situation. Who dared to say that they were 100% confident? Yang Chendong was so sure, without the slightest bit of impetuousness. It didn't seem like he was speaking without thinking. Didn't it mean that he really had thought about it long ago and was prepared long ago? But what was he relying on? I heard that you hired an army of 100 people. Those people have firearms that our great Ming dynasty does not have. With them, you were able to successfully rescue Zhong. Is this true? Hu Xiao began to wonder where Yang Chendong's confidence came from. The first thing he asked was what Su Yozhen said. It is true, Yang Chendong replied in a resolute tone. I did hire an army. They also have firearms that are many times more advanced than our great Ming dynasty. With them, they have no problem dealing with the wall of cavalry. But what? Hu Zhongning, who was listening intently, asked anxiously. It's just that the cost of hiring them is too high. Every time they complete a mission, it costs 10,000 taels per person. Moreover, it costs at least 1,000,000 taels per person. In other words, even if you only hire one person, you have to pay 1,000,000 taels of silver to hire them. Sigh, it's really a waste of money. Yang Chendong said, while shaking his head, indicating that he could not bear the burden. So much. Hu Zhongning was also shocked by the high cost. 100 people cost 1,000,000 taels of silver. Didn't that mean that the money needed to hire 100 people could support an army of a few 100,000 people at the border for a year? Yes, it's that much. Moreover, it's impossible to negotiate the price. This is because I have done business with them before and have some credibility. If it were someone else, I'm afraid that even if they paid, they would not be able to hire them. Yang Chendong lowered his head and let out a long sigh. His expression showed that he could not bear the burden anymore. Admitting that Su Yozhen was one of his people was the sincerity that Yang Chendong showed to the Hu clan. Since they were all relatives, it would not be good to hide some things. If people knew about it in the future, how would they meet each other? But even if they were relatives, there were some things that could be said and some things that could not be said. For example, the mercenary army was originally his own army. He did not need to spend any money at all, and they would completely obey his orders. Yang Chendong would not tell Hu Xiao about this. Not only that, but he also had to pretend that it was very difficult. Only in this way would the old man speak up for him at the crucial moment. It could also be said that Yang Chendong was willing to say so much to Hu Xiao because he wanted to use his mouth to persuade Zhu Qiyu and let him know that only he had the strength to reverse the situation. Only in this way could the other party come to him, and he could ask for an exorbitant price. When Yang Chendong did things, he had always done things step by step. Even people like Hu Xiao would often inadvertently be used by him. By the time he reacted, he would often not know whether to laugh or cry. At lunchtime, the atmosphere seemed to have returned to normal, but Hu Ming and Hu Zhongning both seemed to have a lot on their minds. Yang Chendong, on the other hand, kept sitting there with a modest smile, which made Hu Yin glare at him fiercely, but then her eyes became incomparably warm. Hu Yin did not know what Yang Qindong said to her grandfather and father, but she was sure of one thing, and that was that he would definitely not harm her family. Chapter 174. This time, Hu Yin brought back so many good things. Compared to the other married sisters, her face was full of glory, and she received many envious gazes from the crowd. And all of this was brought to her by Yang Qindong. How could she be dissatisfied? After a seemingly quiet lunch, Hu Yin bid farewell to her parents and family and left the Hu estate with Yang Qindong. After watching them leave, Hu Zhongning asked eagerly, "Father, can I send someone to investigate him?" The governor of the Brocade Guard originally had the power to investigate cases. This time, he planned to use his power to understand his son-in-law. "You can't. Zhongning, remember this. Although he is not as old as you, he is meticulous, far-sighted, and far-sighted. Even I can't compare to him. If you want to do anything, you won't be able to hide from him. If you do this, it will only hurt the relationship between the two of you. It is meaningless." Hu Chong shook his head and gave a high evaluation of Yang Qindong. Hu Zhongning didn't expect his father to think so highly of Yang Qindong. Although he was a little unconvinced, he was used to listening to his father's orders for a long time. This made him immediately dispel the idea of doing anything. "Okay, I won't do anything. But father, how will I explain this to the emperor in the morning court tomorrow?" Father will have to think about it carefully. The news came too suddenly. It was so sudden that Hu Chong couldn't completely digest it, let alone think of a way to deal with it. Imperial Palace. When Zhu Qiyu saw Jining appear in front of him, he immediately ignored his status as the emperor and got up. He asked anxiously, "How is it? Did you find out anything?" Replying to your majesty, this subject has sent out a lot of spies and obtained proof that the loyal Marquis really has a very elite army by his side. In order to avoid alerting the enemy and to avoid causing a misunderstanding between the two sides, our people did not come into close contact with them and did not see what the new firearms looked like. However, there is one thing that can be confirmed, and that is the existence of new firearms. This has been confirmed through some of the things that have happened. Jining wiped the sweat from his forehead as he answered Zhu Qiyu's question. He gave off the feeling that he had worked very hard to obtain this information in such a short time. But in reality, he had already experienced the new firearms before, so he naturally knew that everything was true. Hearing that there was indeed a new type of firearm, Zhu Qiyu saw a glimmer of hope. "That's impossible. What if we make it ourselves? If it's really as powerful as you say, with such firearms, why should we be afraid of others?" Human nature was greedy. After knowing the benefits of the new firearms, Zhu Qiyu started to have ideas about it. Perhaps it was because of his identity as the emperor that he had the misconception that everything under the heavens belonged to the emperor, and that all the good things under the heavens should belong to him. Jining had thought of this before, and she had paid a heavy price for it. She naturally knew that this path would not work. Faced with Zhu Qiyu's wishful thinking, she could only say, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid this won't be easy." "What do you mean?" Hearing that the matter was impossible, displeasure appeared on Zhu Qiyu's face. Jining was stared at by that stern gaze, and her entire body tensed. She knew that if she did not explain the matter clearly, she was afraid that the emperor would hold a grudge against her. If she was not careful, he might even replace her and find someone more obedient to take power. Eunuchs were close officials of the emperor. Naturally, they enjoyed the benefits of being in a favorable position. This was also the main reason why they could become powerful and even have real power. At the same time, eunuchs relied on the emperor's favor. Once they lost this support, they were nothing. They would be chewed up by those officials in an instant, and not even a scrap of bone would be left. Jining was well aware of the reasoning behind this. How could she dare to make Zhu Qiyu unhappy? Seeing the emperor's dissatisfied expression, she hurriedly explained, "Your Majesty, think about it. Those mercenaries saved Ing Zong's life on the battlefield. How could he not see the value of these people? However, they were not used by him. This shows that this matter is difficult to accomplish. As for how the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage used to convince those people, I'm afraid that we will need to investigate to find out. Jining had no choice but to bring up Ingzone. Perhaps in the eyes of this new emperor, only his former imperial brother could give him some pressure. As expected, hearing Jin Ying's explanation, Zhu Qiyu's expression became much more normal. Something that even his imperial brother could not do. It seemed normal that he could not do it. The new firearms were not easy to obtain, and the mercenaries would definitely not listen to him. Zhu Qiyu had no choice but to set his sights on Yang Chendong. He had long heard of this gifted scholar, Yang Chendong, who had even conferred the title of the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage, attracted Zhu Qiyu's attention. Beloved official, what do you think of the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage? Hearing the emperor's thoughts change so quickly, Jining was startled at first, but quickly recovered. Your Majesty, the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage is very talented. He also has the ability to earn money. He is a rare talent. However, how is his ability to command troops? This subject does not know. Jining had already encountered Yang Chendong more than once. Although the two of them hadn't interacted much, he had never profited from him. If possible, he really didn't want to provoke this kind of person. However, since the emperor had asked, he still had to answer truthfully. That's right. This person's ability to earn money is very strong, regardless of whether it is in the immortal abode or in the realm beyond heaven. It is said that he is an existence who earns large sums of money every day. Even that unremarkable Yang Bao, I heard that he also earns quite a bit of money. This kind of person is a talent and should be used by us. Zhu Qiyu longed for someone with the ability to help him. When he thought back to today's morning court, when all the officials had been so helpless, he thought that perhaps if Yang Chendong had been present, the situation wouldn't have been so awkward. Hearing that Zhu Qiyu wanted to put Yang Chendong in an important position, Jining lightly shook his head. Your Majesty, this subject said before that the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage is very capable of earning money. Thus, rather than calling him an official or a scholar, it would be better to call him a merchant. However, all merchants value profit over loyalty. No matter, it's good that he has a request. I'm afraid that a person has no desires. That way, we won't feel at ease using him. How about this, beloved official? Immediately go see the Marquis of Loyalty and ask him about the matter of asking him to go to war. If he agrees, we will give him command of the army. Zhu Qiyu was truly decisive. He didn't doubt those he used and didn't use those he doubted. In this aspect, he was slightly better than Zhu Qizhen from Ingzone. At the very least, he wasn't so jealous. Since the emperor had given the order, Jining knew that it was useless to say anything else. He immediately nodded in agreement. This subject obeys. Soon after, just as Yang Chendong and Hu Yin returned to the Yang clan manor from the capital, Jining arrived. The current Jining was on the same level as Wang Zhen. His power was so great that few people could compare to him. His arrival naturally attracted Yang Chendong's personal welcome. Welcoming Jining was simply giving him face. As the saying went, if you're good, I'm good, everyone is good. Until he had enough soldiers to peacefully take over the great Ming dynasty, Yang Chendong didn't want to put on an aggressive front unless it was necessary. Yang Chendong and Jining were seated in the guest and host seats in a side hall. This had almost become a habit of Yang Chendong's. As long as it was a eunuch or a lowly person, no matter how much power they had, he would not receive them in the main hall. Those who could be received in the main hall were all people that Yang Chendong valued and admired. Jining naturally didn't know about this habit of Yang Chendong's. If he did, he would probably be burning with rage right now. Not only did he not know, but he also had a request to make. Upon seeing Yang Chendong, Jining became extremely courteous, maintaining a smile on his face. This one was too busy the last 2 days and was unable to attend the wedding of the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage. I am truly sorry. You're too kind. Eunuch Jean is accompanying His Majesty. How important is that? Marquis marrying a wife is just a small matter. Yang Qindong chuckled, appearing completely unconcerned. In truth, he hadn't even asked Jining for advice on his wedding day. There were times when Yang Qindong would accommodate others for the sake of the greater good. For example, on a wedding day like this, he truly didn't want to see someone who was neither male nor female appear in front of him. Even some of his colleagues in the brocade guard, who were true men, had come uninvited. The only ones who had truly been invited were the court officials. Jining clearly knew this, but he had purposely raised this question to express his dissatisfaction. He also wanted to use this as a pretext to suppress Yang Qindong and have him take control of the conversation. Unexpectedly, Yang Qindong didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. He used the excuse that marrying a wife was a small matter to cover it up. He didn't even say the most basic polite words. This little test made Jining understand that the following negotiations wouldn't be too smooth. At the same time, he became more careful. The conversation changed from probing to straightforward. Marquis of loyalty and courage, you must already know about what happened at the morning court today. Someone has recommended you to lead the army against the Walla and raise the prestige of our country. Jining was expressing that he understood his situation. He had just made a trip to Minister Hu's residence and must have received news of such an important matter. Now, please state your position. Jining didn't have any intention of beating around the bush. When Yang Qindong heard this, he smiled. This was also good. He didn't have to probe too much and could save a lot of time. All right, since Eunuch Jin's words are so straightforward, then Marquis will also state his position here. It's just a mere Walla army. To be honest, Marquis doesn't really care about them. I won't hide it from Eunuch Jin. Marquis has already contacted the overseas mercenary headquarters. The army they've sent to support our great Ming should be here soon. Chapter 175. What? You've already contacted them in advance? When Jining heard this news, her expression was one of extreme shock. Yes, as the ancients say, if one does not consider the future, one will have immediate worries. After witnessing the ferocity of the Walla cavalry outside the Tumu castle, this marquis already knew that it would be difficult for our great Ming Empire's army to be their opponent. Thus, he prepared for a rainy day and sent out a signal to send out reinforcements. What? Is Eunuch Jin blaming Marquis for acting on his own? There was a faint smile in Yang Qindong's eyes as he stared at Jining. It was as if he wanted to see through his inner thoughts. No, how could that be? For some reason, Jining felt a sense of pressure. He had only felt this kind of pressure not long after entering the palace, when he was serving Zhu Di. It's fine as long as you don't. In truth, it's nothing much. I presume that someone of Eunuch Jin's abilities already knows how much it costs to hire these 4 mercenaries with advanced firearms. It's naturally best if the imperial court can take out this money. Everything will be fine, and the capital will have no more worries. But if there's some difficulty, Marquis can pay for it himself. But if that's the case, they probably won't participate in the operation against the Walla army. After all, it won't cost much to have them protect me and my property from leaving the capital. Marquis can still afford it. But if they go into battle, the cost is truly not something Marquis can afford. Yang Qindong, who had always been so proud of his wealth that he didn't know how to spend it, was now crying about how poor he was. Jining couldn't help but grimace at these words. This was a clear threat. If Daizong was unable to fork out enough money for the military expenditure, Yang Qindong would bring his men and leave the capital. Perhaps he would directly seek refuge with Zhu Qijin, who was currently settling down in Nanjing. If this was the case, Jining didn't even dare to imagine what sort of chain reaction it would set off. He would not forget that it was precisely because of the opening of the immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven that the hearts of the people were at ease and many officials were willing to stay in the capital. Then, if he left now, would those officials who swayed according to the wind also leave with him? If the people wanted to leave, the officials would have to go with them, and the capital would truly be nothing more than an empty shell. At that time, before Walla's army could even arrive, the capital would have already fallen into chaos. This duke knows about this matter. However, this matter is of great importance. This duke still needs to report back to the emperor to make a decision. Seeing Yang Chendong draw the line, Jining knew that the initiative had changed hands. Unless she didn't want to rely on this person's strength to help, she could only fulfill the conditions to protect herself. After Jining finished speaking, she stood up and looked like she was about to leave. Eunuch Jean, please wait. Marquis hasn't finished speaking yet. The emperor and the imperial court would provide the military necessities, and Marquis would only be a middleman, which would not benefit him in any way. As the saying goes, one should not get up early when one is powerless. Here is one of Marquis' personal conditions. Oh, it's all written on this paper. I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jean to bring it back for His Majesty to see. Marquis will be waiting here for your good news. Yang Chendong was beaming with joy and contentment. At this moment, Yang Chendong was beaming with joy as he handed a piece of white paper filled with words to Jining. He was openly asking the imperial court for benefits from the emperor. How could this be the conduct of a law-abiding official? Normally, Jining would have ridiculed him, and then a large group of embroidered uniform guards and Easter Depot agents would surround this place and arrest him. But now, he had a favor to ask. Although he was angry, he could only forcefully suppress his dissatisfaction. He even forced a smile and said, "All right, I will report the loyal Marquis' intentions to the emperor. Don't worry." Jining reached out and took the paper full of words. Then he strode away. He was really afraid of Yang Chendong. He was afraid that if he left at night, Yang Chendong would say something that would embarrass him. Seeing Jin Ying's back gradually disappear, Tiger's Mane, who had been standing guard beside Yang Chendong in the side hall, took half a step forward and said, "Young master, are we really going to help Dai Zong? Why don't we take advantage of this opportunity to watch him perish? That way, when we make a move at the last moment, won't we be able to reap the benefits?" Foolish. Yang Chendong, who had been smiling, suddenly had a cold expression. He looked at Tiger's Mane and said, "Have you forgotten what this young master said before? We're all Han people, so how can we protect the interests of the Han people and let them live better? That's what we need to do and consider. As for anything that harms the interests and lives of the common people, we must not do anything, understand?" Yang Chendong was suddenly angry, which gave Tiger's Mane a fright. He immediately half-knelt on the ground and said, "Young master, I was wrong. You're the director of the Security Bureau. When you have nothing to do, you should analyze the situation properly. In the future, there will be many uses for you. If your ability proves that you can't keep up, then it's time for us master and servant to part ways." Yang Chendong sighed softly and said with a tone of disappointment. When he heard that he had to leave Yang Chendong because of this, Tiger's Mane was really frightened. His expression was blank, and he said in fear, "Young master, don't worry. Tiger's Mane will definitely study hard and won't make such a mistake again." While Yang Chendong was teaching Tiger's Mane a lesson, in the carriage, Jining had already opened the paper that Yang Chendong handed to her. When she saw the requirements written on it, she punched the window frame of the carriage and said angrily, "Loyal Marquis, you are really pushing your luck. Loyal Marquis, you are going too far." In the palace, after Zhu Qiu saw the piece of paper sent by Jining, his expression changed unpredictably. In the end, he roared in anger. On the paper, Yang Chendong actually asked to open a bank of the Yang family, a business to deposit money. In other words, he wanted to build a private bank, a bank recognized by the Great Ming Dynasty. Money and soldiers had always been synonymous with ruling a country. Often, when you had these 2 points, it was equivalent to having the foundation to establish a new power or even a new country. Yang Chendong's request for Zhu Qijin to agree to open a bank was equivalent to taking food from a lion's mouth. No wonder he was so angry. "No, I absolutely cannot agree to it." Zhu Qiyu threw the paper in her hand to the ground, looking angry. Jining bent down to pick it up and carefully came to Zhu Qiyu's side. "Your Majesty, please calm down. For the sake of your health, don't be so angry." How can I not be angry? This Yang Chundong clearly wants to loot a burning house. Does he really think that without him, we won't be able to defeat the Walla? At worst, I will personally lead the army into battle. Zhu Qiyu was so angry that he was almost roaring. It was obvious how angry he was at this moment. When Zhu Qiyu mentioned leading the army into battle, Jining somehow thought of Wang Zhen's death in the chaos of the army. She couldn't help but shiver. She quickly advised, "Your Majesty, you can't. The Walla is coming with ferocious momentum. Our army's morale and strength are lacking. This is not the right time to fight." Not the right time? Even if I can't defeat them, do you think that Yang Chundong can defeat them? Or do you think he's stronger than me? Zhu Qiyu was so angry that he lost his head. At this moment, he was so angry that he questioned Jining. Jining's face was filled with fear and trepidation. She knelt on the ground with a thump. "Your Majesty, you have a body of gold. You are the true dragon, the son of heaven. Naturally, there is no one more powerful than you in this world." However, that Yang Chundong didn't rely on himself. He hired mercenaries with new firearms with a large sum of money. Mercenaries? That's right. Since they can be hired with a large sum of money, why can't we? How about this, my beloved official? You think of a way to contact those mercenaries. We will also pay how much money Yang Chundong is willing to pay. I don't believe that they can't be used by us. Zhu Qiyu was ruthless. He decided to throw money at them and compete with their strength. After the Great Ming Dynasty was ruled by Ren Xuanji, there was a lot of money in the national treasury. If it was a competition of wealth, how could the newly developed Yang Chundong be a match for a country? Seeing that Zhu Qijuan's eyes were almost red from anger, Jining knew that she couldn't refuse this matter. He immediately agreed and then quickly left the palace. He was very suspicious that if he continued to stay, he was afraid that if he was displeased, he would be in big trouble. When faced with an enraged emperor, it was better to stay away from him. The embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern Depot were very efficient. They had long since begun investigating who the leader of the mercenaries was. In addition, Yang Chundong hadn't tried to hide anything. Since this force had already been exposed, they had no intention of withdrawing it. Sooner or later, they would have to announce it to the world. Since that was the case, they might as well do it openly. What harm was there in letting others know? After finding out that the leader of the mercenaries was called Xiao Feng, and that he was a citizen of the Great Ming Dynasty, Jining brought a few of her trusted subordinates to meet him in an unremarkable restaurant. Ever since the immortal abode appeared in the city, the business of the other restaurants had been greatly reduced. In the past, some of the tycoons rarely patronized the restaurant, and the restaurant was barely hanging on despite the death of its owner. The restaurant they met in was in such a miserable state. She asked to reserve the entire restaurant, and even threw down 10 taels of silver. The owner readily provided the location. By the time Xiao Feng appeared, Jining had already drunk 3 cups of tea. With his current power, there were very few people who could make him wait like this. A trace of impatience appeared on his face. It wasn't until Xiao Feng appeared with 2 of Lung Feng's subordinates that a trace of joy appeared on his face. "Company Commander Xiao, I'm here." Xiao Feng, who was attracted by the shouts, only casually raised his head to take a glance. He then calmly walked toward the 2nd floor. His footsteps did not have the slightest intention of speeding up because of the other people waiting. All of this was seen by the few embroidered uniform guards who had followed him. Perhaps it was because they were used to being arrogant, but when they saw someone even more arrogant than them, they were naturally unhappy. Thus, when he heard this, he said as they had discussed, "Eunuch Jean, I'm very sorry, but this isn't a problem with the money." Jining, who had been prepared to talk incessantly and even wondered if she could get some more money from the commission for her own use, was immediately struck dumb by Xiao Feng's answer. She didn't understand. Just now, they had said that they could be hired with money, so why couldn't they do it now? Seeing the confusion on Jin Ying's large face, Xiao Feng shook his head and seriously said, Eunuch Jean presumably knows that I am only a company commander and belong to a branch of the mercenary army. There are officers above me, so I can only report your request to the higher-ups. As for whether they will accept or not, that will depend on the higher-ups. What? You mean that your position doesn't allow you to make the decision on this matter? Jining had thought that Xiao Feng was the head of the mercenary army, but to her surprise, he didn't even have the authority to make the decision. That's right. I truly don't have the authority to make the decision. Of course, if your emperor is willing, you can report the price first. I will immediately report the situation. I think it won't take long before we get a reply. Xiao Feng nodded and said in a businesslike tone. Upon hearing that he still had to report the matter, Jining considered the current situation in the capital and realized that he probably didn't have much time to prepare. Thus, he anxiously asked, "Then how long will it take for you to report the matter?" "That will depend on luck. If everything goes smoothly, it should be about a month or two." Xiao Feng pretended to be thinking very seriously, and after thinking for a while, he very cautiously replied. Yang Qindong had naturally thought of this answer, so that Jining wouldn't have any other ideas. Reality proved that when Jining heard this answer, he immediately became listless. Only now did he realize that what Xiao Feng had said wasn't a problem with the money, but rather how to interpret it. This was Yang Qindong's method of giving people hope and then giving them disappointment. In order to prevent others from thinking that these mercenaries were directly related to him, he couldn't refuse Jin Ying's request, but he also couldn't fulfill his wish. In this way, the delaying technique could be put to good use. Jin Ying left in disappointment, not even offering a price. He probably also knew that if he waited for Xiao Feng to report the matter, who knew how long he would have to wait? At that time, whether or not the capital even existed would be up in the air. Trying to change the situation would be pointless. Upon returning to the imperial palace, Jining truthfully reported his meeting with Xiao Feng to Zhu Qiyu. At this time, Zhu Qiyu had already awoken from his rage at Yang Qindong's request, or perhaps it could be said that he was no longer so angry. When he heard Jin Ying's report, he let out a long sigh and said, "So, we can only agree to the loyal Marquis request. I'm afraid that's the only thing we can do," Jining weakly replied. The emperor trusted him so much, but if he couldn't even handle such a small matter, he truly felt that he had no face left. "Beloved official, what do you think of this matter? If I agree to the loyal Marquis request and allow him to set up a private bank, what kind of adverse effect will it have on us?" Knowing that there was no other choice, Zhu Qiyu began to face the problem of the Yang clan's bank. Jining had already begun to consider this matter on the way back from the restaurant. Since the mercenary route was not feasible, they could only face Yang Qindong. The matter of the bank had to be placed before them. Hearing Zhu Qijuan's question, Jining hesitated for a moment, and then a vicious light flashed through his eyes as he said, "Your Majesty, this might not be a bad thing. You can agree to let him set up a Yang clan bank, as long as Walla retreats. Won't your Majesty have the final say in your territory? What if the loyal Marquis is not here one day? Don't you think that the money in the bank will be confiscated? If that's the case, everything the loyal Marquis is doing now is just making a wedding dress for Zhen." "Beloved official, is this what you mean?" Zhu Qiyu originally had this idea, but he was the emperor. This kind of matter of getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness was not good, so as to avoid other people's gossip. However, Jining was completely different. He was just a eunuch. For someone who wasn't complete, it was normal for him to do anything. "Your Majesty is wise." Jining saw that Zhu Qiyu understood what he meant and immediately knelt on the ground and exclaimed, "Ha, good, good." The problem was solved so easily. Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but be in a good mood. If that's the case, what's the harm in agreeing to his request? Not only that, we should also create momentum for him. How about this? When a Yang family bank is established, the imperial palace will also deposit some silver into it. Presumably, with this emperor taking the lead, there will definitely be many people depositing silver, and the amount won't be small, right? Yes, your Majesty is wise. When a Yang clan bank is set up, it will be a fat pig. Once it's fattened up, your majesty can slaughter it at any time and use it for your own purposes." Jining also chuckled at the side. At this moment, the two officials had malicious smiles on their faces. If Yang Shandong saw this, he would definitely be overjoyed. In the Yang clan manner, Xiaofeng had already rushed back and reported the first sentence he said to Jining from the beginning to the end of their meeting. If Jining was present at this moment, she would definitely be very surprised. Company Commander Xiaofeng, who had said that he didn't care about the loyal Marquis, was now so respectful and careful when he saw Yang Shandong. "You've done well. Go and have a good rest." Yang Shandong, who was very satisfied with Xiaofeng's performance, smiled and watched him leave. He knew that after this meeting, even if Zhu Qiyu didn't agree, he would have to agree. In this way, the Yang clan bank would be recognized by the imperial family, and its development would be just around the corner. Of course, with Yang Shandong's intelligence, it was impossible that he hadn't thought of Zhu Qiyu's revenge. However, killing him was undoubtedly a fool's dream. He would let the other party be happy for a while. When the Yang clan bank really became strong, it would be too late for regrets. Tiger's Mane immediately sent a message to Gao Xiong in Qiqian City. Have him transport all the gold stored in the city and plundered from the sea to the capital. I have great use for it. Yang Shandong gave the order after some thought. The matter of the Yang clan bank would soon be resolved. In comparison, this was a profitable business. With money, he would have a foundation for development. With money, he could do many things that he wanted to do. At that moment, he hummed a little tune as he walked towards the rear courtyard. There were 4 outstanding beauties waiting for him there, waiting for him to appear. Chapter 177. In the main hall of the Imperial Palace, the officials had gathered early in the morning for a meeting. There is only one topic for this so-called meeting: who should lead the army to battle Walla? In yesterday's Imperial Court, Vice Minister Su Yozhen of Taichung Temple had recommended that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Shandong lead the army. Zhu Qiyu had not agreed on the spot and had instead given the officials 1 day. Early this morning, this topic had become the first matter to be resolved. Last night, another report had come from the front lines. Commander and Commander-in-Chief Wuqing Count Shiheng had led a defeated army of less than 30,000 retreating toward Datong. There was nothing in front of Walla's army to block their path, and they were able to pass through Jiong Pass and head straight for the capital. This meant that the enemy would arrive at the capital in 7 days at the slowest and 4 at the fastest. If the capital was still unprepared, it would be broken through and everyone would be captured or killed. With the situation so grim, a candidate had to be chosen. Jining announced the news she had received last night in front of all the officials. There were those in the imperial court who were terrified, uneasy, and pale. Civil officials used their mouths while military officials used their sabers. In times of peace, etiquette came first and reason was paramount. This naturally created a situation in which civil officials suppressed military force. But in an emergency situation, reason naturally did not make sense. Trying to reason with the enemy was tantamount to telling a tiger in the mountains to switch to a vegetarian diet. How laughable was that? It was no different from walking into the tiger's den. When they saw that the war was unavoidable, the civil officials naturally shut their mouths. On the contrary, they even revealed expressions of fear. They were completely different people compared to how they were in the past, talking about the past and discussing the present. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? After repeated defeats, Walla's army had placed an enormous pressure on the officials. One could truly say that they paled at the mere mention of it. In this situation, now that there was a candidate to recommend, the officials naturally did not hold back on their praise. Minister of War Yi Ming proposed that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Shandong lead the army. This new minister was truly rather afraid that if there was no suitable candidate, Dai Zong would have him lead the army into battle. If that happened, what difference would it be from sending him to his death? With the Minister of War taking the lead, the other officials naturally agreed. At this moment, they were treating a dead horse as if it were still alive. And it wasn't just the officials. Even Hu Xiao and Hu Chongning, who had opposed the idea yesterday, were now among the officials who supported it. Not only did they support Yang Qindong leading the army, they also requested that he be given great authority. They also said that if the army could not be unified, countless variables could appear on the battlefield. Obviously, when they returned to the Hu estate yesterday, Yang Qindong's words could be considered to have convinced the Hu father and son, which was why they had such a change today. The crowd of courtiers almost unanimously supported Yang Qindong. Sitting high on the dragon throne, Zhu Qiu knew that the general trend could not be changed. At the imperial court, he ordered people to go forward and pass on the imperial decree for Yang Qindong to attend the imperial court. At this moment, the newly ascended emperor had clearly made up his mind. In the Yang clan manner, Yang Qindong wore a black gauze hat and a turtleneck shirt. There was a python pattern on the chest patch and a belt around his waist. He looked like a third-rank official as he sat in the main hall. Beside him, Huyin, Xiao Yin, Lady Shui, Lady Xiang, and Yang Duo were pointing and laughing. From time to time, they would cover their mouths with their hands and chuckle. Clearly, this was the first time they had seen the sanctimonious Yang Qindong. Is there something wrong with that? Seeing that the 5 women's eyes were so curious and changing, Yang Qindong finally couldn't help but ask if there was a problem. No, it's very good. I used to see grandfather and father dressed like this when they went to court. I just didn't expect Sixth Lang to have such a day, so I'm very curious. Huyin covered her mouth and chuckled while shaking her head. She wanted to pretend to be serious, but no matter how she looked at it, she could not hide the smile on her face. There was really nothing wrong with Yang Qindong's clothes. If there was anything to blame, it could only be blamed on his young age. He was not even 20 years old, yet he was dressed so formally. It gave the girls a feeling that he was too dignified and ridiculous. Is there really no problem? Yang Qindong asked with some disbelief. He glanced at the women one by one. Apparently, he did not believe Hu Yan's words just now. There's really no problem. Seeing the disbelief on Yang Qindong's face, 7th sister Yang Duo stood up. It's just because you rarely wear court attire, so everyone is not used to it. Yes, I'm also not used to it. Forget it. I won't wear it. Come, take it off for the young master. Yang Qindong also felt uncomfortable after wearing these clothes, so he simply decided to stay away from them. As he spoke, he really took off the court attire. Xiao Yin stepped forward to help and asked with doubt, Sixth Lang, do you really want to take it off? Didn't you say that the emperor would send an edict to invite you to enter the palace in a while? There's nothing wrong with entering the palace, but who stipulated that I have to wear court attire to enter the palace? It's so awkward, so it's better not to wear it. Yang Qindong smiled and shook his head. In his heart, he was thinking, I don't have the intention to be an official of the Great Ming Dynasty, so why do I have to abide by their rules? Besides, if I can't even make this decision and have this little freedom, then I'll be too pitiful. After taking off the court attire and changing into a new set of green clothes, Yang Qindong felt incomparably comfortable. He couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Nothing is more important than being yourself. You should also remember, unless it's an important occasion, you can wear whatever you want. Wear whatever is comfortable. Life is only a few decades, so don't be too hard on yourself. Just as he changed into a new set of green clothes, a eunuch came to pass on a message from outside the Yang family manor, asking the loyal marquis to immediately enter the palace. The emperor and all the civil and military officials were waiting for him. Tiger's Mane had already prepared a healthy horse. Yang Qindong nimbly flipped onto the horse and waved at the women behind him. Then, under the protection of Tiger's Mane and Xiu Vi, the first guard, he went straight to the capital. Hu Yan watched her husband leave. When she couldn't see his shadow anymore, she put on the appearance of a big sister. She turned around to look at Xiao Yin and the other 2 girls and said, Lu Lang has left. According to his instructions last night, we must immediately take action. Second sister Xiao Yin will stay in the Yang family manor to take care of the overall situation. Third sister Lady Shui and fourth sister Lady Xiang will go to the capital. As long as there are cheap properties and fields, buy them and register them. We'll listen to big sister's instructions. Xiao Yin, Xiao Yuxiue, and Dong Hanxiang hurriedly agreed. Yang Duo and her daughter were left behind. Seeing everyone start to get busy, their faces were filled with envy. At this time, her thoughts were also changing. In her eyes, women were no longer just women who knew how to take care of their husbands and children. They could actually do many things. In the imperial court, the officials had been standing here for a long time. Some of the more impatient officials even looked out of the hall more than once, as if they were waiting for something. Amidst the anticipation of the officials, a eunuch's typical Drake-like voice rang out. The loyal Marquis requests an audience. He's here, he's here. When the officials heard the shout, they hurriedly straightened their clothes and stood in place. Even Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, subconsciously straightened his dragon robe and looked outside the hall with bright eyes. Amidst everyone's anticipation, the azure-robed Yang Chundong strode into the throne room. The last time he came to the throne room, it was the second day after he entered the capital. He had beaten Wang Go and received the treatment of beating the drum. Compared to before, this time, he was less nervous and uneasy. The imperial court had long ago decreed that when entering the hall to meet the emperor, one had to wear the corresponding official robes. But at this time, Yang Shindong was dressed in azure-robed and entered the imperial court, yet no one said anything. Even the censors, who loved to nitpick, acted as if they did not see him. Subject Yang Shindong pays respects to your majesty. My majesty is... Yang Shindong entered the hall and knelt when he was 10 steps away from the throne. After allowing Yang Shindong to kneel in front of him, Zhu Qiyu raised his hand and said, "All right, loyal Marquis, stand up and speak." "Thank you, your majesty." Even though he did not like kneeling in front of the officials in the imperial court, there was some etiquette that could not be discarded. After answering, Yang Shindong slowly stood up. When he stood up, he stood there like a javelin, giving off the feeling that no matter what wind blew, he would not move. Standing among the officials was Hu Zhongning. He had been practicing martial arts since he was a child and had some skill. At this moment, when he saw Yang Shindong's performance, he could not help but have a thought in his mind. His son-in-law seemed to be a martial artist, and his strength should not be weak. But why did he not notice it before? Yang Shindong stood where he was. Zhu Qiyu, who did not understand martial arts, naturally could not see Yang Shindong's true strength. His intuition told him that the loyal Marquis was standing there with great vigor. "Loyal Marquis, we have summoned you to this hall to discuss matters. I presume that you also know what is going on? Walla's army is threatening the capital, and the officials have recommended you to lead the army. We also believe in loyal Marquis, but are you willing to do your duty for the country?" Even though he had already sent Jining to privately discuss this matter with Yang Shindong, he still had to do his duty. At this moment, he still had to go through the proper procedures. This subject is willing to do his duty for the country, share his majesty's burden, and do his best for the peace and prosperity of the great Ming. Anyone could say beautiful words, and at this moment, Yang Shindong had put on a perfect display of the relationship between ruler and subject. Good. Zhu Qiyu was elated to see Yang Shindong so readily agree. "Loyal Marquis, hear this. You are made General of Swift Cavalry, primary second rank, and left Commander-in-Chief of the 5 armies of the capital. You are in charge of the large and small armies of the capital, and you are in charge of all the soldiers in the city." Since he was going to be put in an important position, and at this critical moment, a promotion was only natural. As for controlling all the soldiers in the city, this was naturally because of the urgency of the situation, and he had no choice but to give Zhu Qiyu this important authority. Zhu Qiyu was keenly aware that this was a battle of life and death, so he naturally could not be careless. Chapter 178. This subject accepts the decree and thanks for your majesty's grace. Yang Qindong knelt and bowed. Zhu Qiyu had only accepted the decree and didn't make any promises. He knew that it wasn't enough to just give Yang Qindong military authority, and it was time to state the conditions that they had agreed on. Otherwise, if he didn't put in any effort, it would be equally dangerous. His gaze first swept across the officials before landing on Yang Qindong. This time, the Walla has invaded the borders and is heading straight for the capital, causing the capital to be in danger. I heard that the price of grain has skyrocketed, and the value of gold and silver has shrunk, causing the commoners to panic. With this in mind, we believe that this isn't only due to Zhongxin's defeat, but also due to the merchants taking advantage of the situation. Thus, we have decided to open a private bank among the commoners. Loyal and courageous Marquis, we wish to hand over this responsibility to you and request that you stabilize the price of goods in the capital in the shortest time possible. Are you able to do so? He first talked about the situation in the capital, and he didn't forget to mention the matter of Zhongxin's defeat. Then, he threw out the idea of establishing a private bank and asked for Yang Qindong's opinion. These scenes made the officials feel overwhelmed. Only Yang Qindong had an indifferent look on his face. He had long expected such a result. This was originally a matter that had been discussed. Just as Zhu Qiyu thought, if he was only given military authority and no other benefits, he might still defend the capital, but that was it. However, if he obtained enough benefits, he would be able to fight this battle beautifully. After kneeling and bowing 3 times, Yang Qindong finally revealed some gratitude. This subject is willing to establish a private bank and contribute to the economic development of the Great Ming Dynasty and the stability of the country. At the same time, this subject intends to change the name of the private bank to the Yang Family Bank. At that time, this subject will pay 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury every year as business tax. I ask for your majesty's permission. Hiss. A series of gasps could be heard in the hall. As for the matter of establishing a bank and changing its name to the Yang Family Bank, many people still didn't understand what was going on. However, there was one sentence that was very clear. That was, if a bank was willing to hand over 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury, that was equivalent to half of the annual agricultural tax. What kind of figure was this? It was also money that many officials could not earn in their lifetime or even several lifetimes. However, it was easily promised by Yang Qindong. How could people not be shocked when they heard it? For real, Emperor Zhu Qiyu was the most surprised. If you don't manage the household, you don't know the cost of firewood and rice. These words were also applicable to the emperor. Originally, Zhu Qiyu only wanted to be Yuan. She only saw the emperor's awe-inspiring appearance and how everyone responded to his call. However, after becoming the emperor, he realized that money was the most important thing in a country. Money was needed for a natural disaster. Building irrigation works required money. Building a city required money. More money was needed to raise officials and soldiers. In short, if one wanted to be a wise emperor who was praised by everyone, then he needed to use countless amounts of money to solve everything and strive to satisfy more people. This was the emperor's task. Although Ren Xian's rule was first and the national treasury was abundant, a lot of money was used in the Battle of the Tuma Castle. After the defeat, it was unknown how much money was needed to compensate the soldiers. Moreover, there were 2 emperors ruling at the same time. The income of a country was divided into 2 parts. As a result, it was foreseeable that in the future, there would be more income and less expenditure. Moreover, if he wanted to become a truly famous ruler, the task of unifying the entire country was a must. It was very likely that he would have to fight with Zhu Qiyu. If he wanted to fight a war, who knew how much money he would need? As a result, how to generate income became the focus of the work in the future. At this time, Yang Qindong stood up and said that he would set up a Yang Family Bank and will be able to send 2 million taels of tax every year. How could this not make Zhu Qiyu's heart blossom with joy? A Yang Family Bank could pay 2 million taels a year. If there were 10 such banks, then wouldn't the problem of expenditure be solved? Wouldn't they be able to deposit more taels into the national treasury? In his joy, he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Cough, cough. Jining, who was standing at the side, coughed softly. She used this method to remind Zhu Qiyu of his loss of composure in front of the palace. At this moment, the emperor also reacted. He quickly made up for it. Good, very good. Since the loyal marquis is so confident, we will deposit 500,000 taels first. Depositing 500,000 taels of silver was nothing to an emperor. This was just Zhu Qiyu's way of expressing his support for this matter. Many thanks, Your Majesty, for being the first customer of the Yang family bank to deposit money. This subject will give you a monthly interest of 0.45%. That is 500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest is 2,250 taels of silver. Yang Shindong quickly thought and gave an answer. With a monthly interest of 0.45%, that was 100 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 450 taels of silver. 1,000 taels of silver would be 450 taels of silver. 10,000 taels of silver would be 45 taels of silver. This kind of interest was still very high. At least, it was higher than the current interest of a modern bank. This naturally became a great temptation, causing the eyes of the other ministers to light up when they heard the result. 500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 2,000 taels of silver. That was enough money for many large families to spend for 2 to 3 months or even longer. Although there were very few people who had so much savings, they should have at least 50,000 taels of silver. This way, the monthly interest of the Yang family bank would be 200 taels of silver. No matter how one looked at it, it was appropriate. Not only were the officials shocked by this result, even Zhu Qiyu was shocked by Yang Qindong's words. Loyal Marquis, do you know that the words of the emperor are not joking? This subject naturally knows. Your Majesty only needs to prepare the silver. Once we win this battle to protect the capital, the Yang family bank will quickly be established. At that time, Your Majesty only needs to send people to deliver the silver and then collect the monthly interest. Yang Qindong said with confidence. Although the interest of this deposit was not low, it was nothing compared to the interest he set for the loan. As a modern person, he naturally knew that money only had an important use in circulation. If everyone saved their silver and did not use it to stimulate consumption, the progress of society would be much slower. Zhu Qiyu naturally believed Yang Qindong's words. In front of the officials, he said, "Good, then we will wait for the opening of the Yang family bank." Ha ha! With Zhu Qiyu's laughter, the court session came to a successful conclusion. However, when the officials walked out of the hall, not many of them revealed relaxed expressions. First, they still doubted whether Yang Qindong, who was not even 20 years old, really had the ability to protect the capital. Second, was opening that bank really that profitable? If so, should they deposit their money in it? The officials all had their own thoughts. Yang Qindong did not leave with the officials. Instead, after watching Emperor Zhu Qiyu leave, he was called to the side by Jining to discuss the details of the next step. Jining was resting in a courtyard within the palace. In a pavilion built on water, the two of them sat facing each other. Loyal Marquis, have a taste of this Duke's tea leaves. Jining was all smiles. The defense of the capital would depend on this person, so this was naturally not the time to be giving him the cold shoulder. On the contrary, he was waiting for Yang Qindong to state his conditions, the treatment of the mercenaries. Both Zhu Qiyu and Jining were keenly aware of this. They had placed Yang Qindong in command not because of his military talent, but because he could directly order the mercenaries with the new firearms. Even Yang Qindong himself knew that relying on the 10,000-some soldiers in the capital was simply not enough. In the end, he still had to rely on the new soldiers he had trained. Since this was the case, he naturally had to obtain enough benefits. Otherwise, this opportunity to demand an exorbitant price would be hard to come by again. The tea leaves are pretty good. It seems that eunuch Jean has some good stuff, Yang Chundong said with a dazzling smile, seemingly very satisfied with Jean Ying's hospitality. Since this was a negotiation, a relatively harmonious atmosphere was naturally of utmost importance. It was not a life-and-death battle between two enemies. It was just a matter of money. This required excellent patience and a good atmosphere. Ha ha, loyal Marquis, you praise me too much. This duke is simply being rewarded by His Majesty. Jean Ying threw his head back and heartily laughed, his good mood written all over his face. How could he not know that this was an opportunity for Yang Chundong to ask for benefits, as well as an opportunity for him to obtain benefits? Although the two of them were very different in age, they both had the heart of a fox. Using a large fox and a small fox to make up the situation was not excessive at all. As expected, His Majesty's rewards are always the best, Yang Chundong said with some emotion. Then, he brought up the main topic, but I wonder what kind of reward His Majesty will give for using the mercenaries this time. Finally, they talked about the main topic. At this moment, Jean Ying's expression became much more serious. But I wonder how many mercenaries loyal Marquis has invited this time, and what are their chances of defeating Walla's army? It seemed that Jean Ying was much more mature than Yang Chundong, as if he had always held the initiative. Yang Chundong did not care about this. With the mercenaries in hand, the initiative was in his hands. As for who made the first request, in his opinion, it did not matter. This was not an equal negotiation and transaction to begin with. Haha, how much chance of victory there is, how many mercenaries can be invited to help, all depends on how determined His Majesty is. Yang Chundong picked up the teacup and took a sip. At the same time, he spoke with confidence. Chapter 179. Oh, based on what you're saying, if the Emperor's reward is enough, we can definitely win this battle. Jean Ying was not very interested in Yang Chundong's boasting. He was just a young boy who was not even 20 years old. He had only been on the battlefield once and relied on his so-called advanced firearms to save Zhu Qizhan. Did he really think that he could treat all the heroes of the world as if they were nothing? Could he really treat the Tile army as if they were invisible? Wasn't he being too arrogant? Jean Ying wanted to strike a blow at Yang Chundong and weaken his momentum. Then, during the negotiations, he would have more power to take the initiative and naturally be able to obtain more benefits. Yes, Marquis has absolute confidence, Yang Chundong replied confidently. There was still a calm smile on his face. How could he not see Jean Ying's intentions? How could he not know that war was ever-changing? Logically speaking, even if you had great power, you could not speak too confidently. But this time, he was going to do the opposite. He had absolute confidence that he could win this battle. All of this came from his confidence in the firearms in the warehouse and his absolute trust in the cold front. He was about to bring the tea to his mouth and see how Yang Chundong would answer his question. As long as he said something that lacked confidence, that would be the time for Jean Ying to press the issue. Then, when the time came, he would be able to lower his demands to the minimum. Then, he would be able to make a contribution in front of Zhu Qiyu and think of a way to obtain more benefits for himself. However, before he could drink the tea, Yang Chundong had already given him an answer. It was an answer that was certain and confident. He said that he had absolute confidence in defeating the Walla's army. This answer was completely out of Jean Ying's expectations. After a moment of shock, a cautious light flashed through his eyes. He said, Marquis, war is not a game. You can't just talk about it casually. You have to see blood and kill. Of course, Marquis knows this. When Marquis saved Ing Zong and the 9 important officials at Tuma Castle, he also saw blood. Who knows how many of the Walla army died at Marquis' hands? Of course, I know this very well. In response to Jean Ying's question, Yang Chundong responded with a smile. He looked very casual and confident. Marquis, are you that confident? This time, you're not trying to break out of the encirclement while the Walla's army is not paying attention. Instead, you're trying to stop the enemy outside the country? Then, you might be facing a large group of the enemy's army? Jin Ying's tone of voice was still somewhat skeptical. When the Tumu castle was defeated, it was true that Yang Qindong had saved Zhong and the 9 important officials. But at the time, he had chosen to go in the opposite direction of the enemy. He had not taken the shortest path back to the capital, but had instead circled around to the enemy's empty rear. Jining had long ago had the embroidered uniform guard investigate this matter. It was precisely for this reason that he believed that while the strength of the mercenaries was impressive, they could only fight on a small scale. In a real battle, these so-called new firearms would not be of much use. Based on what he understood, Jining did not believe that the mercenaries were omnipotent and invincible. But what he did not know was that the reason he had chosen to go to the enemy's rear rather than to protecting Zhong was because Yang Qindong had intended to do so. He had done this in order to prepare for the simultaneous reign of 2 emperors and give Zhu Qiyu enough time to ascend the throne. Otherwise, if he had really taken the shortest path to the capital with the Lung Feng army, how could there have been the matter of Zhu Qiyu ascending the throne? Of course, Yang Qindong wouldn't explain this to anyone. Otherwise, everyone would know what Sima Zhao's intentions were. It was precisely because he could not explain this matter to anyone that Jining had misunderstood. He thought that the mercenaries were only slightly stronger than ordinary soldiers and were not truly invincible. Since he had questions, he naturally had to answer them. In response, Yang Qindong smiled and said, "Marquis said that we can defeat the Walla army, so we can naturally do it. Of course, this all depends on how much silver His Majesty can give us. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses move, the provisions move first. I'm sure Eunuch Jin understands this principle." "This is only natural." Jining nodded. Seeing Yang Qindong so confident and giving such an absolute answer when asked about the outcome of the war, the great eunuch was very curious as to how much this person wanted. Since the loyal Marquis is so confident, this is naturally a great thing. Presumably, when we really win the battle, the Emperor and the common people will definitely be grateful to the loyal Marquis. However, I wonder how much money it will cost. There's no need to say thanks. As a subject of the great Ming dynasty, one of Marquis' responsibilities is to defend the country from the enemy. At the very least, the amount of silver is not what Marquis wants. It's just that the strength of the mercenaries is too great. The price to pay for their help is very high. Yang Qindong looked as if he wanted to explain in detail, but he was interrupted by Jining. "All right, we are all understanding people and smart people. There's no need to go into so much detail. You only need to tell me the amount of silver you need. When the time comes, I will naturally report it to His Majesty." Jin Ying interrupted Jining. This was her way of expressing her reluctance. At the same time, it was also a signal that everyone was understanding people. There was no need to beat around the bush. It was better to directly state the amount of benefits needed in order to be willing to work. Jining felt that she had seen through the loyal Marquis. Yang Qindong did not explain this. There were many things that had to be told in the end. Before that, everything would be in vain. He only chuckled and said, "Eunuch Jin is a straightforward person. Since that's the case, Marquis will not be pretentious. How about this? We need this amount to win this battle." As he spoke, Yang Qindong extended his right index finger. 1 million. Jining chuckled. She had thought that Yang Qindong would ask for an exorbitant amount. However, when she saw that he had only extended a single finger, she immediately laughed. Young people were young. Their appetite was small and their determination was lacking. He had exposed his bottom line so quickly, and it was only 1 million taels of silver. Chuckling, Jining once again brought the tea to her mouth. The corners of her mouth curled up into a mocking smile. Yang Qindong also chuckled. He was in no hurry to explain. When he saw Jining pour the tea in her mouth, he suddenly said, "I think Eunuch Jin has misunderstood. It's not 1 million, but 10 million. Puffed. As expected, she spat out a mouthful of tea. Seated across from her, Yang Qindong was prepared. He casually tilted his body, allowing the tea to fly past him without splashing on his body. Jining did not care about this sudden loss of composure. He didn't even ask if the tea had landed on Yang Chendong. Instead, he glared at the person in front of him. After around 4 or 5 breaths, he clenched his teeth and squeezed out each word. Loyal Marquis, this is not the way to ask for benefits. Even if the capital is somewhat dangerous, this is not the time to ask for an exorbitant amount. Although she warned Yang Chendong, she was inwardly cursing his greed. 10 million taels of silver? Did she think that silver could fall from the heavens? If there really was 10 million taels of silver, who knew how many soldiers could be trained and how many elite divisions could be created? No, no, no. Yang Chendong raised his right index finger and shook his head. This isn't asking for an exorbitant amount. This is just how much the war needs. If it can't be satisfied, then it's fine. Marquis won't lead the army. Yang Chendong leaned back in his chair, his relaxed expression seeming to say that he had not asked for this matter. Someone else had asked him to do it, and he was only reluctantly doing it. Yang Chendong had an indifferent look on his face, as if he had no interest in this so-called military authority. As a result, Jining felt as if she had punched cotton. Having Yang Chendong lead the army was a matter that had been decided in the imperial court, and it could not be easily changed. Not to mention, apart from Yang Chendong, there were no other suitable candidates at the moment. If they randomly sent someone and lost the war in the end, the consequences would not be acceptable to everyone. Jining's expression changed again and again. She took 2 quick breaths and suppressed the anger in her heart. She opened her mouth and said, Loyal Marquis, even if you say that before the troops and horses are mobilized, the provisions will come first, but isn't 10 million a little too much? Not at all. Seeing that Jining was beginning to take his request seriously, Yang Chendong had a carefree smile on his face as he said, Eunuch Jin probably doesn't know, but for the sake of victory, I invited 300 more mercenaries. Together with the 100 left in the capital, that's a total of 400. Is this correct? That's how the bill is calculated, but there's no need for 10 million taels of silver. Jining was naturally overjoyed to hear that another 300 elite mercenaries had come, but she was still a little conflicted about 10 million taels of silver. Yang Chendong didn't mind and continued to calculate. 400 mercenaries. Normally, each of them would cost 10,000 taels of silver. I trust that Eunuch Jin has heard of this before. Correct. Although 10,000 taels of silver per person is a high price, if they truly do have exceptional fighting strength, it's still barely acceptable. But even so, it's only 4 million taels of silver. Where did 10 million come from? Jining anxiously retorted. Eunuch Jin, there's no need to be in such a rush. Wait until Marquis has finished calculating the bill before you speak, all right? A hint of displeasure appeared on Yang Chendong's face. Presumably, anyone who is constantly interrupted would be unhappy. Chapter 180. All right. Forget about the loyal Marquis for now. I will listen. Jining was very good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, he would not have been placed in such an important position by Zhu Qiyu. He naturally noticed Yang Chendong's displeasure. In order to prevent the situation from becoming tense, he could only obediently shut his mouth. Jining did not interrupt. Yang Chendong's expression became better. He continued, Normally, it is true that hiring a mercenary soldier for a mission costs 10,000 taels of silver per person. However, the same mission should not be of different levels. For example, some missions are simple and easy to complete. Of course, this price is acceptable. However, this time we are fighting with fewer people. If we use the previous price to calculate, it will not work. I won't hide it from Eunuch Jin. Marquis had already seen the urgency of the situation. Thus, he had already discussed with the leader of the mercenary soldiers. He asked for their help at a price of 20,000 taels of silver per person. Only then did he convince them. Based on this calculation, 400 people would be 8 million taels of silver. Adding on the military expenses and food for the 10,000 soldiers of the city defense army, it would be at least 1 million taels of silver. In the end, the remaining 1 million taels of silver is for Eunuch Jin's hard work. I believe eunuch Jean will not refuse. Based on this calculation, Marquis is the one who is doing the work but not getting anything out of it. Sigh. Finally, he finished speaking. However, after he finished speaking, Yang Qindong purposely acted as if he had been greatly wronged. It was as if he had done all this for nothing. Sitting there and listening, when he heard that the cost of hiring 400 elite soldiers was 8 million taels of silver, his eyes widened. His face was filled with disbelief. It was no wonder he was so surprised. With 8 million taels of silver, he would be able to find a way to scrape together millions of soldiers. However, there were only 400 soldiers going to battle. This ratio was too great. However, when Yang Qindong finished speaking and said that he had left him 1 million taels of silver, Jin Ying's expression became much better. She sighed inwardly at Yang Qindong's sensibility. No wonder this person could become good friends with Wang Zhen. This kind of consideration for his friends was very likable. However, when he thought about it from another perspective, 10 million gold coins was a large expenditure. When he reported it to Zhu Qiyu, there was a chance that he would be rejected. Thus, he said with a bitter expression, "Loyalty, Marquis. This duke appreciates your good intentions. However, 10 million gold coins is truly too much. See if you can reduce it by half. This duke's share can also be reduced by half." Jin Ying endured the pain as she thought about how she had gained both the benefits and Zhu Qiyu's favor. In this way, her benefits would be reduced by a total of 500,000 taels. With this money, he could have more people become his trusted aides. This was an extremely good thing for increasing his strength. She really wanted to be a whore, but also wanted to set up a memorial archway. Yang Qindong despised Jin Ying in his heart, but he spoke with certainty. "My 9 million is not 1 tael less." Of course, if eunuch Jean wants to be more spirited, then 9,500,000 taels will do. Clearly, the 500,000 taels that Yang Qindong asked for were the 500,000 taels that were given to Jin Ying. The amount didn't change. The only thing that changed was her share of the benefits. How could Jin Ying be willing to accept this? She shook her head and said, "How can this be? Since it's like this, then 10 million taels will do." Just as she finished speaking, Jin Ying continued with a worried expression, "But Loyalty Marquis, I'm afraid that His Majesty won't agree to such a large sum of money at once. Also, I'm afraid that the Ministry of Revenue won't be able to gather so much money in such a short time." Seeing that Jin Ying had accepted this reality, the corners of Yang Qindong's mouth curled up into a smile. Eunuch Jean doesn't need to worry about this. Marquis has already thought of a solution for His Majesty. The National Treasury won't be able to take out so much money in such a short time. It's fine to say this to others, but I'm sure that Eunuch Jean and Marquis both know this. But to take out 10 million taels of silver at once, I'm sure that even His Majesty's heart will ache. If that's the case, the National Treasury can take out an advance of 5 million taels of silver. I'm sure that this amount should be enough to convince His Majesty. Jin Ying was naturally overjoyed to hear this. That's right. If it's only 5 million taels of silver, it will naturally be much easier to convince His Majesty. But this way, how can we convince the mercenaries? Do we have to give them the money in installments? Of course not. How could the money used for war be given in installments? That would create a major problem. Yang Qindong shook his head. If it can't be given in installments, then what about the remaining 5 million taels of silver? Jin Ying was somewhat confused by Yang Qindong's words. Don't worry, Eunuch Jean. Marquis thinks like this. Aren't there still many properties belonging to the imperial household in the capital? For example, the deeds to many houses and residences belong to His Majesty, so it's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount. Think about it. If the capital really can't be protected, these things can't be taken away just because His Majesty says so. It's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount and use them as the 5 million taels of silver. As for Marquis, he'll naturally find a way to gather the 5 million taels for war. Eunuch Jean will also need to make a trip to the newly appointed Minister of Revenue, Jean Lien. At the very least, no one will be lacking in benefits. Chuckling, Yang Qindong set his sights on the best houses in the capital. This was one of the goals of his trip. It was said that the antiques of prosperous times were the gold of troubled times. In truth, houses were also extremely cheap items in troubled times. At crucial times, everyone would be thinking about saving their lives. So who would buy a house? At that time, even if it was given away for free, no one would dare to stay. Yang Qindong understood this principle. So how could Jining not? With the Walla's army approaching the capital, the people were panicking, and house prices were plummeting by the day. Even so, there were still more people selling than buying. One could say that houses were the most worthless thing in the world. And if she could convert this worthless thing into money and give it to Yang Qindong, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? With these houses, Yang Qindong would probably have to do everything he could to protect the capital. This seemed like a perfect solution, and it would be much easier to use this as an excuse to persuade Zhu Qiyu. Not to mention, he would be able to earn some money from buying and selling the houses. As for the Bureau of Revenue, given his status, who would dare to stop him if he wanted to do something? When she thought about how she could get this job done and still make a profit, Jin Ying's complexion visibly improved. Good, the loyal Marquis's intentions are good. Since this is the case, this association will immediately report to His Majesty. I presume that this matter won't be too difficult to handle. Jining regained her confident expression. It was as if everything had returned to her control. After negotiating the terms, Jining wanted to see the Emperor, Zhu Qiyu. Her eyes were filled with eagerness. In response, Yang Qindong showed no intention of rising. Instead, he raised his teacup and leisurely said, "Eunuch Jin, there is one more matter that I don't know if you know. Marquis has suddenly been suspended from his post in the embroidered uniform guard. Now that I mention it, this was a post that His Majesty personally conferred upon him. For what reason?" Jining had been thinking about how to report this matter to Zhu Qiyu when she heard Yang Qindong's words, and her face instantly paled. There was such a thing? This eunuch was unaware. Oh, then it must have been a subordinate acting on his own initiative. Haha, speaking of which, it's just a post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. Marquis doesn't care much about it. However, now that the entire nation is focused on fighting against foreign enemies, if people find out that Marquis has been suspended from his post, it's inevitable that some people will let their imaginations run wild and think that Marquis has done something wrong to incur the Emperor's wrath. If that's the case, it's extremely disadvantageous for Marquis to lead troops into battle. Yang Qindong spoke with a faint smile, but it was clear that there was still a trace of anger in his eyes. He was clearly a little angry. Jining was indeed unaware of this matter. Although the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was his trusted aide, LV Gue, he didn't report everything to him. His main duty was to stay by His Majesty's side. Only when something major happened would he report to him. Therefore, when he first heard Yang Qindong say that he had been suspended from his post, he was stunned. When he heard the consequences of this, he felt that the matter was a little serious. At this moment, Yang Qindong's authority was not to be questioned. Otherwise, how could he lead troops in a battle? How could he carry out orders and prohibitions? Marquis of Loyalty, I really don't know about this matter. Your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was indeed conferred by His Majesty. Even if something happens, it should be up to His Majesty to decide. This time, LV Gue and the others have overstepped their boundaries. I ask that Marquis of Loyalty not take issue with them. Now, I can announce that your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard has been reinstated. After this, I will find LV Gue and have him apologize to you." Jin Ying, who knew the importance of this matter, immediately expressed his opinion and placed Yang Qindong in an important position. All right, then I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin. Since that's the case, Marquis will go to patrol the city and meet with the generals. All right, I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin to hurry up with the matter of the silver. Walla's army will soon arrive at the city. If they aren't in place by then, Marquis can't guarantee that the soldiers will fight with their lives. As for the matters of the Ministry of Revenue, I'll arrange for my cousin Yang Fu to go there. If there's anything, you could discuss it. Yang Qindong finally stood up. He had said what he needed to say and done what he needed to do. It was time to prepare for the war. Good, good. Don't worry, Marquis of Loyalty. I'll go see His Majesty now. The silver will be quickly sent over. All right, I'll have a trouble eunuch Jean. All right, LV Gue should be eunuch Jin's man. Since that's the case, when the silver arrives, ask him to find Marquis to get your 1,000,000 taels. Yang Chundong chuckled, then cupped his fists and bowed before leaving the palace. Chapter 181. Yang Shindong had specifically asked Lu Gue to come and get the silver. It was clear that he wanted to make things difficult for Lu Gue and take revenge for his previous suspension. How could Jining not see that? She just thought that since Lu Gue had been wronged, then he had to pay the price for his mistake. It was just lowering his head and admitting his mistake. Presumably, Lu Gue did not have the guts to not listen to her and not lower his head. After Yang Qindong left, Jining went to the palace where Zhu Qiyu was resting. She picked out some things that could be said about what had just been discussed. When Jining said that Yang Qindong needed 10 million taels of silver to guarantee victory, Zhu Qiyu was shocked. What? Does fighting a battle require so much silver? It was no wonder that Zhu Qiyu was so surprised. Ever since he had taken the throne, he had never experienced this. Previously, when Shi Hung had left the city to fight, he had been in too much of a hurry. He had only asked the Ministry of Revenue to replenish some provisions before leaving. At that time, Zhu Qiyu was still trying to stabilize his position and did not think too much about it. Now, when he heard that fighting a battle required so much silver, he was naturally surprised and even shocked. He continued to listen. When he heard that he only needed to pay 5 million taels of silver and the rest could be offset by real estate in the capital, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, he still had a stomach full of doubts. My dear subject, does fighting a battle require so much silver? Although Jining was very trusted by Zhu Qiyu and held great power, she also knew that the emperor's inquiry could not be concealed. Otherwise, once she lost the emperor's favor, she would lose everything. Your Majesty, normally we don't need so much money to fight a war, but this time we used the loyal Marquis. He also invited the mercenaries with advanced firearms to help. More than 80% of the money is for them to use. According to what the loyal Marquis said, the ammunition for that kind of firearm is very expensive. Moreover, with our great Ming's technology, it is impossible to make it. That is why the price is so high. I see. After listening, Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but sigh and say, my great Ming dynasty has a vast territory and abundant resources. Why can't we make an advanced firearm? After this battle, we have to urge the weapons workshop to hurry up and develop them. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will remember this matter. However, do you think we should agree to the request of the loyal Marquis? The situation is perilous, and the Tile army can arrive at any time. If we don't settle down and miss this chance, the capital will be in danger. Jining anxiously asked Zhu Qiyu, still thinking about the benefits that belong to her. Promise him. As long as we can protect the capital and repel the Walla, all he needs is some money and property. What's wrong with giving it to him? Just as my beloved official said, this is my country, my world. Everything here belongs to me. Naturally, I could take back what I have given away at any time. Zhu Qiyu stood there with his back straight and his eyes looking into the distance. At this moment, he exuded the aura of an emperor. When these words reached Jin Ying's ears, he couldn't help but kneel on the ground in submission. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will do as you say. Jin Ying left. After receiving Zhu Qiyu's decree, the Ministry of Revenue quickly took out 5 million taels of silver and sent it to Yang Qindong's immortal abode. Yang Fu was also invited to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss the matter of property. Although Yang Fu was Yang Qindong's older cousin, he had long been impressed by his younger cousin's methods in Jianing Prefecture. Later on, because of his outstanding performance, he had been assigned to manage the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode, wielding great authority. Now that Yang Qindong had arranged for him to go to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss matters, How could he dare to be negligent? After meeting with his younger cousin and understanding Yang Qindong's intentions, he set out. With the money and provisions gradually arriving, the commander-in-chief, Yang Qindong, began to get busy. The first thing he did was summon the commanders of the central, eastern, western, southern, and northern cities, the 5 commanders of the 5 armies, to the immortal abode for a meeting. Yang Qindong had been made general of swift cavalry and left commander of the 5 armies of the capital. He was in charge of all military affairs in the capital, large and small. The order to control all the soldiers in the city had been passed down long ago, and the 5 commanders were all waiting for Yang Qindong to summon them. When the order arrived, the 5 commanders were escorted by a few personal guards to a private room on the 2nd floor of the immortal abode. As commanders of the 5 cities' military office, they were also called commanders. Their positions were not very high, only at the 6th rank, and they were considered military officials. In an environment where the emphasis was placed on literature and the suppression of military might, generals were not valued, and they were even inferior to some of the 7th-rank civil officials. In a place like the immortal abode, they rarely visited. Their positions were low, and their incomes were low. Even when they occasionally visited, they would only be looking for a seat in the main hall. They rarely even visited the private rooms on the 1st floor, much less the private rooms on the 2nd floor. Only Platinum Car members were allowed to enter, and these were people who were either extremely wealthy or extremely noble. This time, they had been summoned by Yang Qindong to enjoy such treatment. When they reached the 2nd floor, they were extremely cautious. Even when they saw the azure-robed Yang Qindong in the private room, they were still very cautious. "You're all here. Take a seat." He looked at the 5 commanders of the 5 armies. They were Tao Jin, Yang Jie, Gao Li, Mao Fushou, and Sun Tong. As generals in charge of defending the capital, there was a limit to what they could do. No one could have imagined that someone would come knocking on their door, so these 5 were not skilled fighters. On the contrary, they had only obtained their current positions because of the influence of their ancestors. But because Ying Zong and Shi Heng had suffered consecutive defeats, the capital had become dangerous, and their positions had become extremely important. It was precisely because their positions were so important that the 5 of them began to think of ways to leave their current positions. Perhaps it was because they were cowards, or perhaps it was because they knew their own weight, but there was no way they could win in this kind of war. This forced them to find other methods. It was as if among the 4 of them, apart from Sun Tong, the other 4 had all found some connections. It was just that time was short, and this was a position that no one could avoid, so Tao Jin and the others had not been able to find a suitable replacement. The situation had already been thoroughly investigated by the Security Bureau, and Yang Qindong was naturally very clear about it. And this time, he called the 5 of them over. To put it bluntly, he wanted to reorganize the internal affairs. He would definitely not allow unstable factors and situations to appear in the midst of a war. The 5 of them stood in front of Yang Qindong with apprehension. When they heard that they could sit down, the 5 of them cupped their fists and said respectfully, "Thank you, Marquis." Seeing that the 5 of them had found a place to sit down, Yang Qindong waved his hand and said to Tiger's Mane, who was waiting at the door, "Pass down the order. Don't serve the dishes yet, and there's no need for anyone to serve here. Everything will be discussed after Marquis has finished discussing matters." "Yes," Tiger's Mane replied, then closed the door of the private room and waited there. At the same time, his ears perked up to ensure that if anything happened in the room, he could immediately rush in to protect the young master's safety. The room was closed, and there was no one else in the room. There wasn't even a cup of tea to quench their thirst. For a moment, the 5 of them felt waves of nervousness, and the more cowardly ones began to break out in cold sweat. Yang Qindong saw the 5 of them's expressions, and for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he did not say a word. It was this overly quiet scene that caused the 5 commanders' mentality to undergo a huge change. They were not sure what their boss's temper was like. What would he do next? The room was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Just when the commanders were so nervous that they did not dare to wipe off the cold sweat on their heads, Yang Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the table, spoke. "The five of you, Walla's army will invade the capital in a few days. Do you have the courage to fight?" "Yes." After being stunned for a moment, the five of them replied in unison. There were only five of them, and their voices were not in unison. Some were loud, some were soft, some were strong, and some were weak. This was a sign that they were lacking in confidence. Yang Chendong, who had seen everything, suddenly snorted, "Do you really have the courage? If I let you lead your troops out of the city to fight, how confident are you in winning?" This. When Tao Jin and the other three heard that Yang Chendong was sending them out of the city to fight, they were momentarily speechless. Sometimes it was one thing to boast, but it was another thing to actually do it. Take them for example. Usually, they were full of vigor when dealing with disobedient commoners in the city. However, if they were to really fight against Walla, perhaps before they even reached the battlefield, they would be so scared that their legs would go soft. Tao Jin and the other three were a little hesitant, but Sun Tong directly stood up and said with an imposing voice, "We are paid by the imperial court. If there is a war, we will fight." You're not bad." After looking at Sun Tong for a while, Yang Chendong's face showed a trace of a smile. With Sun Tong taking the lead, the other four were not as confident, but at this time, they could only express their stance one by one, saying that if there was an order, they would obey. Yang Chendong did not take Tao Jin and the other three's stance to heart. The sixth young Master Yang, who had personally been on the battlefield and completed countless missions, knew very well what kind of people could be used and what kind of people could not be used on a battlefield. There was a saying that one should not be afraid of a wolf-like opponent, but a pig-like teammate. Since he knew the temperament of Tao Jin and the other three, Yang Chendong naturally knew what to do next. "Good. Marquis has seen everyone's performance. Next, we will make appropriate work arrangements according to each of your conditions. When the time comes, you only need to obey the military orders. Come, serve the dishes." After understanding the situation, which was very similar to what the Security Bureau understood, Yang Chendong had a basic understanding of the five people in his heart. Chapter 182. The dishes were finally ready to be served, and the atmosphere was no longer oppressive. On the contrary, because the dishes were all very expensive, and some of them were even dishes that the five of them had heard about but could not afford due to their lack of money, everyone began to wolf down the food. Once the wine was served, the five of them began to toast Yang Chendong to express their respect as subordinates. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Chendong divided everyone's work while drinking with the five of them. Based on what he had said, other than Sun Tong, who was working with him against Walla's army, the other four commanders would each take 200 men to maintain order in the capital. Even though the warden's office had transferred many soldiers from the five cities to the battlefield in the last two wars, each commander originally had more than 1,000 men under their command. Now that only 200 men had been left behind, their authority had been greatly reduced, but none of the four complained. This was because they did not need to go to the battlefield to face a battle of life and death. As long as they could stay alive, it didn't matter how many soldiers they led. After figuring out the thoughts of the five men, Yang Chendong took away their military power after a meal and transferred 4,200 warriors from the warden's office of the five cities to serve him. How could Tao Jin and the other three not see that Yang Chendong was seizing military authority? But none of them expressed any objection. This was their so-called tacit understanding. As long as they could stay alive, they didn't care if their authority was reduced or not. After obtaining the military authority of the five cities warden's office, Yang Chendong had accomplished his first task. After sending off the five of them, his second order was to open the gates and allow the common people to freely choose whether to leave or stay. Originally, when the main gate had been closed, only the side gates had been opened, and a strict inspection had been carried out. But now the policies at the city gates had undergone a massive change. The commoners could enter and leave the city at any time. Everyone quickly spread the news. In just one day, more than 400 households had left the city. 2,000 to 3,000 of them were commoners. Because of this matter, the eunuchs in the palace received orders from Jin Ing to inquire about it. The answer they received was that all of this was done by the Duke of Loyalty. The reason was that if the situation in the city was unstable, once they faced the Walla's army head-on, wouldn't they fall short of success? In order to ensure the absolute safety of the capital, any unstable factors had to be dealt with in advance. When this news reached the palace, first into the ears of Jin Ing, then into the ears of Emperor Zhu Qiyu, this matter was quickly ignored. Using Zhu Qiyu's words, one should never doubt the people one used. Since he allowed Yang Qindong to take control of the military, he could do whatever he wanted. He would support him unconditionally. Some of the officials in court disagreed with Yang Qindong's decision to allow the people and merchants to leave the capital. In their view, how could the people leave the city at any time? If this situation continued to spread and the capital became an empty city, how could the Walla's army defend the city when it attacked? Wouldn't they just be waiting for death? Wasn't letting the people leave the city the same as digging one's own grave? Most people had similar thoughts. Soon, memorials to impeach Yang Qindong were spread all over Zhu Qiyu's desk. Regretfully, at this crucial moment, Emperor Daizong didn't even glance at these memorials, expressing his complete trust in Yang Qindong. He had not received any imperial edict to stop him. On the second day, even more people left the city. In just half a day, more than 5,000 people had left the city. Most of them were merchants who had business in the capital. Merchants valued profit over justice. In their view, it didn't matter who ruled over them. What was important was who could bring the benefits. With this traditional mindset, it was no wonder that they would choose to leave the city when a calamity was about to befall the capital. Before leaving the city, most of the people sold some of their properties and goods to Hu Yin and the other girls at a very low price. For a time, the girls were very busy, and Yang Qindong's business began to blossom all over the capital. In just 3 days, more than a quarter of the merchants in the capital had left. The Yang clan had also spent the 5 million taels of silver that they had prepared. Even Jin Ing had spent 2 million taels of the 5 million taels that the emperor had allocated to him. With 7 million taels of silver and the cheap properties of the imperial household that Yang Qindong had obtained from the Bureau of Revenue, 1% of the capital's businesses now belonged to Yang Qindong alone. In just 3 days, the Yang clan's businesses had more than doubled in size. In particular, almost 90% of the businesses on the street between the sky beyond heaven and the immortal abode were now under Yang Qindong's ownership. Even the location of a Yang clan's bank had been decided and renovated according to the Loyalty Marquis plan. Many people had taken note of Yang Qindong's actions, but they did nothing to stop him. On the contrary, they watched as things unfolded as if they were watching a show. Emperor Jing, Zhu Qiyu, in particular, was watching all of this from the perspective of a spectator. On the first day that Yang Qindong had made his move, Zhu Qiyu had received a report from Jin Ing, but he was not alarmed. He was happy because the more Yang Qindong invested in the capital, the more confident he was in the defense of the capital. The more money he invested now, the greater his harvest would be in the future. It was precisely because there was no one to stop them that all the plans went smoothly. On the morning of the 4th day, a group of 500 embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes appeared outside the immortal abode. Over the past few days, the immortal abode had become Yang Qindong's resting place. After all, now that he had taken command of the army, he could not return to the Yang clan manor like before. If something happened, wouldn't that delay his plans? It was precisely because Yang Qindong was staying in the immortal abode that the appearance of the 500 embroidered uniform guards caused Tiger's Mane, who was responsible for the young master's safety, to become extremely nervous. He hurriedly sent a message to the nearby company commander, Xiaofeng, asking him to hurry over as quickly as possible. At the same time, he also instructed Xiao V's first squad of guards and Dao Xiao's second squad on the street across the street to prepare for any sudden changes. After making all the necessary preparations, Tiger's Mane went to see Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong had slept rather late last night after fighting with the four women. When Tiger's Mane arrived, he had just finished washing up and was about to eat breakfast. When he saw Tiger's Mane enter the room with a nervous expression, he couldn't help but smile. "What is it? Has the Walla's vanguard arrived?" "Not yet. The people from the Security Bureau have reported that their vanguard is still 200 li away from the capital. They'll probably arrive by nightfall." Tiger's Mane relayed the report to Yang Chendong. When he saw the young master looking at the report from the Security Bureau, he cautiously took half a step forward. "Young master, 500 embroidered uniform guards have arrived. They're currently guarding the entrance. However, I've already sent someone to call Company Commander Xiao Feng over. We definitely won't let them threaten the safety of this place. The embroidered uniform guards are here." After listening to Tiger's Mane's report, Yang Chendong's face didn't show the slightest bit of surprise. Instead, he said, "This Jining is quite calm. Forget it. Bring their leader in to see Marquis." Oh. Tiger's Mane originally thought that when the young master learned that so many embroidered uniform guards had arrived at the entrance, even if he wasn't nervous, he would at least show a certain amount of surprise. He never thought that he would still be so relaxed. Could it be that all of this was within the young master's plan? It must be. In Tiger's Mane's eyes, Yang Chendong was already a godlike existence. In his eyes, whatever the young master said was the truth, and whatever the young master did was the most correct.